Imagine this. You're in a group of colleagues, friends, or classmates. Someone makes a mistake, small maybe, but public. The room shifts, eyes turn, judgment brews, and you feel it, that cold, creeping pressure to say something, not to defend them. No, to distance yourself, because silence makes you suspicious. Solidarity makes you complicit. And in that moment, your instincts betray you. You want to be liked. You want to be safe. You want to survive. You throw them under the bus. You might not even realize you're doing it. Maybe it's a small comment. Yeah, I noticed that too. Maybe it's a shrug, a laugh, a subtle nod of agreement. But the effect is the same. You trade loyalty for social currency. You sacrifice someone else's dignity to protect your own. And the worst part, you're rewarded for it. Approval, belonging, a sense of being on the right side. It's not evil, it's human. We're social creatures, hardwired to conform, to protect our standing in the tribe. In ancient times, exclusion meant death. Today, it means humiliation, isolation, the invisible guillotine of social erasure. So we adapt, we signal, we betray, quietly, all to be accepted. But here's where it gets darker. You think you're making a choice, but the truth is, you're being played. Because systems, corporate, political, social, exploit this instinct. They thrive on it. They design environments where moral compromise is not just encouraged, but necessary. Hierarchies depend on betrayal trickling down, ensuring that nobody ever feels fully safe. Everyone is replaceable. Everyone is vulnerable. Everyone learns, eventually, to throw someone under the bus. It's how power protects itself. Take a workplace. A mistake happens. Instead of leadership taking responsibility, blame trickles downward. Someone junior becomes the scapegoat. Why? Because it's easier. Because you need your job. Because speaking up feels suicidal. So you stay quiet, or worse, you agree. You become complicit. Or think about schools. How often are kids taught not to support each other, but to report, to accuse, to climb over one another, for praise or favor? We call it meritocracy, but it's really conditioning. It teaches you early that power comes from separation, not unity. And socially, it's everywhere. The friend group that thrives on subtle exclusion. The online pile-on, where everyone takes turns, proving they're morally superior by attacking someone else. It's not justice. It's not truth. It's performance. A ritual of betrayal disguised as righteousness. And it works. Because betrayal feels good. Briefly, it grants relief. It tells you, you're safe for now. You're in Nis. But it never lasts. Because the system doesn't reward loyalty. It rewards usefulness. And the second you're not useful, you're next. But the worst betrayal isn't what you do to others. It's what you do to yourself. Every time you suppress your conscience to stay liked, you fracture a little. You drift further from your integrity. You rewrite your story to justify what you did. They deserved it. It wasn't my fault. I had no choice. And each lie becomes easier than the last. Soon, you forget where the line was. And eventually, you become the person you once feared. This is how corruption works, not through evil villains with grand schemes, but through ordinary people making tiny betrayals every day. One small sacrifice of honesty, one quiet nod of complicity, one throw under the bus, and it's not just a moral failure, it's a psychological trap, because the more you betray, the more you need to believe you were right. So you double down, you conform harder, you silence dissent, you defend the system. Because to admit otherwise would mean facing who you've become. You didn't mean to be cruel, you just wanted to be liked. But somewhere along the way, your desire to be accepted turned into a weapon you used against others and against yourself. And here's the final twist. Everyone else is doing it too. Everyone is scared. Everyone is signaling. Everyone is silently praying they won't be next. And because of that shared fear, nobody ever stops the cycle. unless someone refuses to throw others under the bus, even when it costs them, unless someone decides that being real is more important than being liked, unless someone sees the trap and walks away. Because that's the real power, in being liked, but in being unshakably honest, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's lonely, even when it means standing alone, while everyone else is looking for their next target. Because once you stop betraying others to protect yourself, you stop betraying yourself to protect a lie. And that is the only way out. Now ask yourself, when the moment comes, and it will you stay silent? Or will you speak? Will you join the pile-on? Or will you walk away? Because what you do next doesn't just define your character, it defines your humanity, and your freedom, and your future. Some people don't just hide their hate, they dress it in praise. They smile, applaud, elevate, and endorse people they privately despise. And the reason? Status? That invisible currency that governs so much of our behavior. The moment admiration becomes a ladder, some people will pretend to love the very figures they wish would disappear. It sounds paradoxical, doesn't it? Praising who you hate. But it's far more common and far more calculated than you think. Because status doesn't just reward authenticity. It rewards alignment. Alignment with power, with influence, with popularity. And when someone you resent holds those things, the quickest path to relevance is to orbit them, grinning, nodding, supporting. Hiding your contempt in applause. We see it in workplaces all the time. The ambitious employee who compliments the toxic boss. Not because they respect them, but because they fear what happens if they don't. Or worse, they hope to inherit their power someday. So they pretend, they flatter, they align. The irony. They might genuinely hate everything that person stands for. But their career depends on appearing loyal, so they offer compliments instead of criticism, respect instead of resistance. Praise becomes a tool, not a reflection of truth, but a survival mechanism in a political landscape. And it doesn't stop at the office. Think about public figures, celebrities, politicians, influencers. There are people who've built entire careers by praising those they envy, despise, or even morally oppose, because being in their good graces means access. It means visibility. It means being seen as important, even if it makes your skin crawl. This isn't just hypocrisy, it's strategy. It's the cold, calculating side of human nature. We're told to be authentic, to stand by our values, but we also live in a world where status can decide your future. And status often demands compromise. And here's the disturbing part. This performance of praise isn't always conscious. Sometimes people convince themselves that they admire those they hate. It's easier that way. If you lie to yourself long enough, it stops feeling like a lie. You start mistaking your survival tactic for sincerity. That's how self-deception evolves into identity. You become what you pretend to admire. You embody the values you once opposed. Not because you changed, but because the lie became safer than the truth. The system rewards this kind of duplicity. It elevates those who know how to play nice, who know how to say the right things to the right people, even when their soul is screaming. The consequence: we start mistaking status for sincerity, power for virtue, popularity for goodness. And in the process, something dangerous happens. The people with the worst intentions get the loudest applause. Not because they're respected, but because everyone's too afraid or too ambitious to speak the truth. Silence becomes strategy, praise becomes currency, and hate hides in plain sight. But this isn't just about others. Ask yourself, Have you ever praised someone you couldn't stand? Laughed at a joke that made your stomach turn? Complimented someone's success while quietly resenting their every move? It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's survival, sometimes it's exhaustion, sometimes it's the fear that telling the truth would cost too much. But every time we praise what we hate, we feed the system that forces us to lie. The ones who rise fastest aren't always the most talented, the most ethical, or the most deserving. Often, they're just the most willing to perform, to play the game, to say what needs to be said, even if it burns on the way out. And what does that do to the rest of us? It teaches us to distrust praise, to question sincerity, to wonder if anyone actually means what they say, or if every compliment is just another strategy for status. This is the slow erosion of authenticity, when truth becomes too dangerous to say out loud, and silence is mistaken for civility, when hate wears a mask of admiration, and no one dares to peel it off. So the next time you see someone praised loudly, endlessly, suspiciously, ask yourself, is it admiration or ambition? Because in a world built on perception, sometimes the biggest lies wear the brightest smiles. Have you ever had someone check in on you a little too often, offer to help in ways that felt unnecessary, speak softly, kindly, but always with a hint of urgency, like your decisions might harm you, like you need saving? That's not always care. Sometimes that's control. And the scariest kind of manipulation is the one that disguises itself as love. Because when someone hurts you directly, you recognize it. You flinch, you defend, but when they hurt you softly, in the name of protection, guidance, or concern, you don't push back. You trust them more. That's when control becomes invisible. They call it just trying to help. But help becomes a leash when it's used to limit your choices. When they insist you shouldn't move cities because you're not ready. When they question your friends because they worry about your judgment. When they subtly criticize your ambitions, cloaking it in love. I just don't want you to be disappointed. And it works, not because you're weak, but because you're human. We're wired to respond to care. It's how we bond, how we survive. But that same instinct, in the wrong hands, becomes a blueprint for quiet domination. This is how emotional predators build control, not through threats, but through dependence. They position themselves as your emotional anchor, your guide, your safety net. Little by little, your sense of autonomy shrinks. You stop making decisions without checking in. You second-guess yourself. You start to believe that without them, you'd fall apart. This isn't just about romantic relationships. It happens with parents, friends, bosses, even entire institutions. Governments call it protection. Corporations call it service. Religions call it salvation. But the mechanics are identical. They create fear, then offer safety. But only if you follow, comply, obey. The care is conditional, and the moment you start thinking for yourself, the love suddenly feels cold. The illusion is so powerful because it rewrites your internal narrative. You stop asking, is this good for me? And start asking, would they approve? You mistake dependency for closeness, obligation for affection. You start to measure your value by how grateful you are for their concern. This is the emotional equivalent of a velvet cage. No bars, no locks, just a deep sense of guilt anytime you try to leave. And guilt is the linchpin, because the manipulator never admits control. They paint themselves as the martyr, the one who's always there, who gives endlessly, and if you resist, you're ungrateful, cold, selfish. They don't yell, they sigh, they don't punish, they withdraw affection. But the message is clear, you owe them. Your freedom is framed as betrayal. Over time you learn to self-police, to quiet your needs, dull your desires, dim your independence. Not because they told you to, but because you've internalized the idea that love means self-sacrifice. This is what makes it so hard to escape. There's no villain in the story, no dramatic abuse, just subtle rewiring, a quiet erosion of self masked as devotion. And here's the most dangerous part: the manipulator may not even realize what they're doing, because they too believe their care is genuine. They've convinced themselves that you need them, that their way is right, that your freedom would be your undoing. In their mind, control isn't control, it's love, which is why it's not enough to spot manipulation in others. You have to recognize how easily you invite it in, how your longing to be cared for, to feel seen, makes you vulnerable to anyone who offers it with open hands and hidden chains. The answer isn't to stop trusting, it's to redefine care. Real care doesn't shrink you. It doesn't demand loyalty or obedience. It doesn't disguise guilt as guidance. Real care creates space. It honors your agency. It celebrates your growth, even when that growth takes you away. So ask yourself, who in your life supports your independence, even when it's inconvenient for them? Who truly listens without steering? Who stands beside you, not above you? Because the most dangerous manipulations aren't the ones that look like threats. They're the ones that feel like home, the ones that wear the face of kindness, the ones that teach you to be grateful for your own chains. And when you finally see them for what they are, you'll realize the scariest part wasn't that you were controlled. It's that for a long time, you thought it was love. Have you ever seen someone stay in a relationship that's tearing them apart and wondered why they won't leave? You think it's fear, loneliness, maybe hope that things will change, but sometimes it's something much darker. Sometimes people stay because the toxicity gives them something they don't get anywhere else: power. Not power over the world, not even power over their partner, but power over themselves, power over someone else's pain, power to feel like they're above someone. Finally, that's the trap. Some relationships don't survive because of love. They survive because of hierarchy. It's not always visible. The bruises might be emotional instead of physical. The control might come wrapped in backhanded compliments, guilt trips, or relentless criticism, disguised as honesty. But underneath it all is a silent agreement. One person gets to feel superior, other slowly forgets who they are. Here's the twist. It's often the one who appears more dependent that's feeding on this dynamic. They know the relationship is broken. They know it's painful. But inside that pain, they've carved out a throne, because outside of this relationship, they feel powerless, invisible, but inside it, there's someone, they matter. Even if it's only because they get to be the one who's better than the other, more stable, more mature, more in control. That illusion becomes addictive. We talk a lot about victims, abusers. Rarely do we talk about the mutual sickness that festers when power is the only currency left between two people. When you've grown up feeling small, worthless, or ignored, the need to feel above someone isn't just psychological, it's survival. You don't crave love, you crave leverage. Because leverage feels like safety, like a guarantee that you won't be the one abandoned, you won't be the one hurt, you'll be the one who stays while the other one begs. And you'd be amazed what people will tolerate just to stay in that role. They'll ignore infidelity, excuse screaming matches, rationalize emotional neglect. Because so long as they believe they're the stronger one, the better one, they're winning, no matter how much the relationship is killing them. And if they're ever forced to leave, they don't mourn the love. They mourn the loss of that one place where they felt like they were above someone. This is how you get toxicity that masquerades as devotion. You hear them say, "But I love him," or "She needs me." But what they really mean is, "Without this, I don't know who I am." It's why people can't let go, even when they're not happy. Because some part of them feels that being above someone, even in a broken relationship, is better than being equal and unseen in the rest of the world. Power, even when it's built on pain, can feel like purpose. And if you think that sounds manipulative, it is, but not always consciously. Often, these dynamics are inherited, unconsciously modeled from childhood. A parent who only loved conditionally, a sibling rivalry turned survival strategy. You learn that love is a battlefield, and staying on top means staying safe. So you replicate what you know. You find someone you can save, or someone who's broken, just enough to make you feel whole. And when they start to heal, or stand up for themselves, or ask for more, you panic, because their growth threatens your role. And your role is all you have. This isn't just sad, it's dangerous, because when your identity is tied to being needed, you'll sabotage anything that threatens that need, even if it means keeping the other person small, even if it means staying miserable, just to feel superior. It's not love, it's a power dynamic, wearing love's skin. But the scariest part, you don't see it while you're in it. You think you're helping, supporting, holding everything together. But really, you're just afraid of what happens when you're not the better. One afraid of being seen as equal. Because equality means vulnerability. It means being truly known afraid. And that's terrifying, when your whole identity is built on being the one who doesn't need. But power isn't connection. Superiority isn't intimacy. You can't build real love on top of someone else's brokenness. And if you try, you'll both stay stuck, locked in a cycle that neither of you knows how to escape. So the next time you wonder why someone stays in a toxic relationship, ask a harder question. What do they gain from the pain? What power does the dysfunction give them? Because sometimes it's not about love at all. It's about identity. And until that's understood, no amount of logic, advice, or intervention will break the cycle. People don't leave when they're done hurting. They leave when they're done needing. And now that we've peeled back the mask on toxic power, let's go even deeper into the quiet war you never realize you're part of until it's already won. You've seen them online, loud voices wrapped in righteous fury, demanding justice like it's their personal crusade. They shout in comment sections, rage on stages, lead movements with hashtags that trend for hours. At first, they seem noble, passionate, heroic, even my Sade. But look a little closer, peel back the surface, and you'll start to notice something unnerving. Some of them aren't fighting for justice at all, they're fighting for attention. Not all, of course, but some, and their voices are often the loudest, because outrage gets applause, rage gets retweets, and moral superiority, that's addictive. The more they posture, the more the world watches, the more dramatic the claims, the more validation they receive. Not for the cause, but for themselves. Justice becomes a stage, and they become the star. It starts subtly. A post about an injustice, then another, then videos, tears on cue, rants with perfect lighting, carefully crafted captions designed to stir emotion. They speak in absolutes, demand allegiance, and leave no room for nuance. Because nuance doesn't go viral, outrage does. And soon it's no longer about the issue. It's about performance, identity, control. They've made justice part of their brand. But justice, real justice, is quiet, slow, uncomfortable. It means doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. It requires listening more than speaking. It demands complexity, not slogans. It costs more than it pays. And that's why it's so often abandoned in favor of spectacle. Because performance is easier than principle. The system we live in rewards noise. Visibility becomes currency. Influence becomes power. And the more someone appears to care, the more power they gain. So naturally, Some people learn to fake it. They wear morality like a costume, not because they care, but because it works. They hijack causes to elevate themselves. Think about it. Have you ever seen someone call out injustice, only to center themselves in every post, every video, every article? Their pain, their outrage, their journey, the issue fades. The community disappears. It's no longer about what's right, it's about who's right. And the moment justice becomes a vehicle for self-glorification, it stops being justice at all. Now here's the darker part. This performative justice doesn't just distract. It damages, it hijacks attention, drains energy, and drowns out voices actually doing the hard work. It creates false prophets, elevating those who've mastered the aesthetics of activism, while silencing those quietly, painfully fighting for real change. And worse, it desensitizes us. When justice is constantly performed, constantly packaged for consumption, we begin to doubt everyone, real victims, real advocates, real injustice. It all blurs together in a sea of content. Skepticism rises, compassion fades, and the ones who truly need help, they get lost in the noise. But let's pause. This isn't just about influencers or activists. It's about you, me, all of us. We're part of this system. We scroll, we like, we share, we elevate the loudest voices, not the wisest. We reward performance, not principle. We mistake visibility for virtue. And in doing so, we help build the very machine that turns justice into a spectacle. So ask yourself, when you speak out, post, share, why are you doing it? Is it for the cause, or is it for how it makes you feel, how it makes you look? Are you seeking change or validation? These are uncomfortable questions, but they matter because justice isn't a performance. It's not a costume you wear for applause. It's a burden, a responsibility, a slow, often invisible fight that doesn't come with claps or likes. Sometimes it even makes you less popular, less liked, but that's the price of integrity. The truth is, anyone can scream into a microphone, but only a few will stand in silence, doing the work when no one's watching. And maybe the scariest part, some of the most dangerous people in the justice space are the ones who need the spotlight most. So next time someone demands justice, look closer. Are they illuminating injustice or spotlighting themselves? Are they empowering others or building a platform? Are they helping the world or just feeding their ego? Because sometimes the call for justice isn't a cry for fairness, it's a cry for attention. You meet them at your lowest when you feel invisible, discarded, painfully ordinary, and they look at you like you're the only one in the room. Suddenly, you're not just seen, you're chosen. That word chosen does something strange to the brain. It overrides logic, suspicion, and self-preservation. It silences red flags and magnifies the smallest gestures into sacred signs. The moment someone makes you feel uniquely selected, something ancient stirs inside you. You want to serve, you want to follow, you want to give yourself to the one who finally saw you. About it, cults don't start with cages, they start with compliments. Love bombing, obsessive attention. You're told you're special, you belong, you're the key to something bigger. Before you even realize it, your boundaries begin to dissolve. And not because you were stupid, but because you were starving. Starving to be wanted, to be chosen. And when that starvation meets even a hint of validation, it feels like salvation. This is how control begins, not with threats, but with affection. You don't fall into obedience, you surrender to it, willingly. And here's the darkest part. You'll protect the person who's controlling you. You'll make excuses for them. You'll attack anyone who questions them. Because to doubt them is to doubt your own worth, and you'd rather be manipulated than meaningless. So you internalize the rules they give you. You tell yourself it's love, that they know better, that you're lucky they picked you. You don't even see the bars forming around you because they're shaped like your deepest desire. It happens in relationships. It happens in politics. It happens in faith. The playbook doesn't change, just the costumes. Every tyrant, every abuser, every manipulator knows this truth. People will accept anything, endure anything, as long as they believe they were chosen. Look at history. The most oppressive regimes weren't built by force alone. They were built on identity. The idea that you are part of the chosen ones, that you're superior, that you've been granted secret knowledge or sacred purpose. And once that narrative takes hold, morality collapses. People will betray their values, their neighbors, even their own families, because they think they're serving something bigger than themselves, because they think they matter. That's the most seductive form of control. Not when someone dominates you, but when they convince you that your obedience is noble. And we don't grow out of it. Children want to be loved. Teenagers want to be noticed. Adults want to be needed. Our desire to be chosen is timeless. And those who want power, real power, don't dominate that desire. They nurture it. They weaponize it. They give it just enough oxygen to burn your independence to the ground. You might think you'd never fall for it, that you're too smart, too independent, but no one is immune to the feeling of being finally, fully seen. The smartest people become the most loyal followers. Because once you believe someone chose you, not for your image, not for your utility, but for your soul, every defense drops. This is why people stay in toxic relationships long after the damage is clear. It's not stupidity, it's the trauma of abandonment meeting the high of being picked. And when your entire sense of worth is tied to that one person, walking away doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like death. You don't need more intelligence. You need more self-respect. You have to stop waiting for someone to choose you. Stop hoping someone will make you feel special. Because the moment your worth depends on someone else's recognition, you've already handed them the keys. And the worst part, you'll thank them for locking the door. So the next time someone makes you feel chosen, pause. Ask yourself, what do they want in return? What am I trading for this feeling? Because love without freedom is just a leash. And being chosen isn't the same as being loved. It's a terrifying thing to realize, that the deepest form of control doesn't come through domination. It comes through affection. And if you don't know your worth, someone else will decide it for you. And once they do, they can make you do anything, even betray yourself, even become their weapon, and you'll smile while doing it. Have you ever had someone listen to you so intently, nod so empathetically, echo your emotions with perfect timing, and yet something felt off? Not wrong. Exactly. Just not so. Like watching a movie scene where the tears are real, but the motive isn't masked. This is empathy as performance, and more often than you think, it's being used to gain power over you. Empathy, when genuine, is one of the most powerful forces in human connection. It bridges isolation, heals wounds, builds trust. But when mimicked, when empathy is weaponized, it becomes a tool of manipulation. Because nothing lowers your defenses faster than someone who appears to truly understand you. You let them in. You soften. You reveal your fears, your insecurities, your vulnerabilities, and they're taking notes. They nod. They reflect your feelings. They mirror your language. It's all part of the act. That must be so hard. Every carefully timed pause, every gentle hand on the shoulder, each one calculated, rehearsed, deployed with surgical precision. You think they care, but what they really crave, niece, is control. Because the person who understands your pain controls your loyalty. The one who echoes your story can rewrite it. And the one who feels what you feel at just the right moment can convince you to follow them, anywhere. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's strategic. Leaders, influencers, abusers, even friends. Many learn that empathy opens doors that brute force never could. It's social camouflage for coercion. A performance so convincing that you never see the strings until it's too late. Imagine a therapist who uses your trauma not to heal, but to manipulate, a partner who comforts you only to guilt you later, a boss who sympathizes just enough to keep you working overtime. The script is the same: feel what they feel, say what they need, and use it to bend their will. Real empathy requires vulnerability, but performed empathy requires calculation. And the difference is everything, because when empathy is real, it makes space for you. When it's a script, it makes space for control. This kind of empathy is not about connection. It's about influence. It's a chess move cloaked in compassion. And the more convincingly it's played, the more devastating the result. You begin to doubt your instincts. You tell yourself they care. You rationalize the discomfort. You explain away the inconsistencies until you're tangled in a relationship that feels safe, but slowly drains your autonomy. It's not just personal, it's systemic. Politicians cry on cue. CEOs apologize with trembling voices. Media figures choke up on live television, and each tear, each pause, each perfectly crafted display of feeling isn't necessarily about you, it's about optics. Trust is currency, and empathy, even feigned, buys loyalty at a discount. But how do you tell the difference? How do you know when you're being genuinely seen and when you're being studied? Look for the follow-through. True empathy doesn't vanish when the cameras are off. It doesn't manipulate. It doesn't turn your pain into leverage. It acts without needing an audience. Scripted empathy, on the other hand, feels too perfect. It appears when it's convenient. It disappears when it's inconvenient. And eventually, it asks for something in return. And if you don't give it, that's when the mask slips. The warmth cools. The understanding fades. You find yourself blamed for the very wounds you shared. Your story, once sacred, becomes ammunition. And suddenly, the person who once felt like a safe haven now feels like a trap. This is the dark side of emotional intelligence. The unsettling truth that people can learn your heart, not to protect it, but to control it. And if you don't recognize it, you'll keep mistaking the script for sincerity. You'll keep trusting the actors who play empathy best. And you'll keep wondering why, every time you open up, you feel more and more hollow. Empathy should be a bridge, not a leash, because once it becomes a performance, once it's stripped of vulnerability and sincerity, it stops being empathy at all. It becomes control, wrapped in the illusion of care. And the most dangerous manipulators, they don't shout, intimidate, or threaten. They whisper, nod, and feel exactly what you need them to feel. Or at least, they make you believe they do. Have you ever told a lie so convincingly, you almost believed it yourself? Not because you needed it to be true, but because you needed others to think it was Ms. That's the trick. That's the hidden game. You don't need to believe what you say, only that others will ease. And once you understand that, a dangerous door opens. Most people assume power comes from truth, that authority requires honesty. That's only because they've never held real power. Real power isn't about being right, it's about being believed, and belief doesn't require truth. It requires performance. A skilled manipulator doesn't lie by accident. They lie with precision, not to deceive themselves, but to craft a world others can't help but fall into mise. They speak with certainty, they radiate conviction, and people follow, not because they verify the truth, but because they feel the confidence. This is the foundation of propaganda, of politics, of persuasion, at every level. It's not about fact, it's about belief. And belief is emotional, not logical. Think about the charismatic cult leader, the smooth-talking politician, the viral influencer. Their power doesn't come from proof. It comes from presence, from knowing that the truth is flexible, that facts are optional, and that performance is everything. They don't need to believe what they say. They only need you to. This isn't just about public figures. Look closer. It's your manager, confidently misrepresenting the team's progress to the board. It's the co-worker, spinning half-truths to climb the ladder. It's the friend who insists they're fine when their world is falling apart, because being believed is more comforting than being known. The terrifying part, the system rewards this. The more convincingly you lie, the more seamlessly you bend reality, the more you rise. Authenticity is praised publicly, but performance is what gets promoted. And the best performances, they aren't even noticed as performances. They feel real. That's the art. To lie so cleanly, so fluidly, that people mistake it for truth. And here's the real kicker. Once you've done it long enough, once the rewards stack up, the need to actually believe disappears. You start measuring truth, not by what is, but by what works. Reality becomes a set of optional guidelines, not constraints. You're no longer asking, is this true? You're asking, will they believe it? This is the root of moral decay at scale. When institutions adopt this logic, when truth becomes negotiable, trust collapses. But appearances hold, because appearances are enough. The PR campaign doesn't need to fix the problem. It just needs you to believe they're trying. The apology doesn't need to be sincere. It just needs to be accepted. The promise doesn't need to be kept, only remembered as having been made. And beneath it all, the lie festers, reinforced by belief, untouched by scrutiny. Now ask yourself, how many lies do you accept every day? Not because they're convincing, but because challenging them feels futile. Because the performance is too smooth. Because the alternative, confronting the truth, would be too uncomfortable. This is how the world is shaped, not by facts, but by consensus illusions. Shared fictions so widespread, so reinforced, they become the new default. And when enough people agree to believe them, even knowing they're false, those lies become the new truth. This is how ideologies survive, how reputations are crafted, how entire nations rewrite their history. Not by rewriting reality, but by managing belief. A story repeated often enough, with just enough conviction, outlives the truth. It buries, and once you see this, the game changes. You start to notice the patterns, the scripts, the subtle shifts in tone, the phrases chosen for their emotional resonance, not their factual value. You realize you've been lied to, not carelessly, but masterfully. But here's the most disturbing truth of all. You've probably done it too. You've said things you didn't fully believe, because you knew the effect they'd have. You've told someone it'll be okay when you weren't sure. You've claimed certainty where you felt doubt, not to hurt, but to persuade, to comfort, to maintain control. And in those moments, whether you admit it or not, you understood the power of belief. You didn't need to believe it yourself. You only needed them to because sometimes that's all it takes to shape reality. Imagine you're in a room full of people you admire. Their eyes are on you. They're nodding, smiling, approving. You've said something they like. They're clapping, not for who you truly are, but for the version of you that you presented. And in that moment, you feel good, respected, admired. But something in you also dies, because the words they applauded weren't entirely yours. That's the terrifying power of social validation. It doesn't just influence behavior, it rewires your morality. You want to be liked, not just casually accepted, but deeply admired. You'll trade pieces of yourself to get there. You might think your values are firm, that they'll hold strong under pressure. But the truth is, they're much softer than you'd like to believe. Flexible, malleable, especially when attention and approval are on the line. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, subtle. You make one small concession to avoid criticism. You say one thing you don't quite believe, just to fit in. You post a thought that aligns with the crowd, even if your gut says otherwise. And every time you do, it gets easier. Mask gets lighter, the applause gets louder, and your sense of self gets blurrier. This isn't weakness, it's design. You're hardwired for belonging. Evolution didn't reward the bold outcast, it rewarded the agreeable insider. Those who adapted, those who conformed. Survival meant being liked, and in today's world, survival has been replaced by social currency. Likes, follows, praise. Inclusion, these things feel like oxygen, and if betraying your values earns them, then betrayal becomes a strategy, not a sin. You see it everywhere. The activist who starts strong with conviction, but gradually dilutes their message to appeal to a wider audience. The politician who once fought for truth, but now mirrors whatever polls best. The friend who laughs at the cruel joke, not because they find it funny, but because they don't want to be the odd one out. The influencer who preaches authenticity while curating every moment for optics. Every one of them made a trade. And so do you. You compromise to be admired. You reshape your beliefs not out of conviction, but convenience, not because you've thought deeply, but because you want to belong. And over time, those small betrayals become who you are. People rarely abandon their values in dramatic explosions. They do it gradually, like erosion. One choice at a time, one compliment at a time, until their reflection in the mirror is still familiar, but empty. What's most disturbing is how good it feels. Validation is addictive. It mimics meaning. It gives you a high, a rush, a sense of importance. You don't even realize you're changing. You just think you're evolving. But you're not. You're being shaped. Because admiration doesn't just reward performance. It punishes honesty. Speak an unpopular truth and watch the room go cold. Challenge the group and feel the silence thicken. Disagree publicly and prepare to be ostracized. So you learn, you edit, you perform, and eventually you forget the difference between what you believe and what you've been applauded for believing. This is how identity collapses. This is how moral compromise becomes a lifestyle, and the system loves it, because the more you crave admiration, the more predictable you become. You'll vote how they want, buy what they sell, say what's safe. You'll be manageable, malleable, mute. They don't need to control you. You'll do it yourself, because deep down, you'd rather be admired than authentic, liked than lonely, praised than principled. And the scariest part, you won't even know you're doing it. But maybe, just maybe, there's another path, one that doesn't reward you with applause, but with integrity. Have you ever noticed how pain can make people magnetic? There's something about a person who's been through hell. They command attention, sympathy, deference. And in some cases, power, maldites, is where things get complicated. Trauma, when shared, can build bridges. It invites connection, invites care, But there's a darker side, one few talk about. Some people, whether consciously or not, learn to wield their pain like currency. They don't just share it. They trade it, leverage it, monetize it. And in doing so, they enter a dangerous game. Pain becomes power. Think of it like emotional capital. The more suffering someone reveals, the more they seem to deserve. More forgiveness, more space, more control. People start tiptoeing, lowering their voices, changing their behavior, not out of genuine respect, but out of fear. Fear of being insensitive. Fear of triggering something. fear of being painted as the villain. That fear becomes obedience. And in a world where attention equals value, trauma becomes a kind of social currency. The more dramatic the story, the more valuable the teller becomes. Victimhood grants authority. Criticism becomes taboo. Accountability off limits. And slowly, power shifts, not because of merit or truth, but because of the sheer emotional weight someone carries into a room. But here's the chilling twist: this isn't always intentional. Some people truly suffer. Some are genuinely broken. But over time, they see what their pain gets them. Doors open, crowds listen, objections vanish. And that reinforcement teaches them something. The same way a child learns that crying gets attention. The brain remembers what works, so they keep playing the part, not because they're manipulative monsters, but because it works. Because it's safer to be pitied than to be questioned. Safer to control through fragility than through force. Safer to say, "You're hurting me," than "You're wrong." This is emotional blackmail, disguised as vulnerability, and no one wants to admit it. Because who wants to be the one to say, "Your trauma doesn't justify your behavior"? Who wants to call out the wounded? It feels cruel, cold, unempathetic. But that's exactly what makes it effective. It silences dissent through shame. The more fragile someone appears, the more unassailable they become. They build a fortress out of their wounds, daring anyone to challenge them without looking heartless. It's not just manipulation, it's moral jujitsu. They twist your empathy into a weapon against you. But empathy without boundaries becomes servitude. And if you don't recognize the game, you'll keep playing it over and over, giving power to those who have mastered the art of passive control. You'll shrink around them, soften your words, excuse their behavior, because they've been through so much, and maybe they have. But pain doesn't entitle you to power. It doesn't make you right, and it certainly doesn't absolve you from responsibility. The truly dangerous part is this: once someone learns that trauma buys influence, they might start collecting it, not healing from it, not confronting it, but hoarding it, letting it fester. Because in a culture obsessed with suffering, the most broken voice often becomes the loudest, and sometimes the most dangerous. Because what happens when pain becomes a throne, when wounds become credentials, when suffering becomes a shield, no one's allowed to question. Power flows toward the most damaged, until damage itself becomes the performance. And then nothing is sacred anymore. Not truth, not justice, not healing, just spectacle. Trauma, once a cry for help, becomes a strategy. And empathy, once a virtue, becomes a trap. So be careful who you follow. Be careful who you excuse, because some people don't want to get better. They want to win, and pain is just how they play the game. Have you ever noticed how easily people believe something when it makes them feel special? A lie that flatters you is easier to accept than a truth that humbles you. That's not a glitch in our psychology. It's a feature, and the people who want power over you know it. They don't need facts. They don't need logic. All they need is a story that makes you feel important, chosen, superior. Because the most seductive lies are the ones that stroke your ego. Think of cults. They rarely begin with fear or submission. They start with flattery. You're one of the few who can see the truth. You're more awakened, more enlightened than the average person. These phrases don't sound like manipulation. They sound like compliments. But that's the trap. You're not just buying into a belief system. You're buying into a version of yourself that feels powerful. Politicians use the same playbook. You're the backbone of this country. You work hard while others take advantage. You're a hero. Praise weaponized as propaganda. It's not designed to uplift you. It's designed to soften you, to seduce you into loyalty without question. Because once you're emotionally invested in a flattering lie, it's harder to let it go. Not because you believe the message, but because you like how it makes you feel. Flattery creates identity, and identity is one of the hardest things to give up. Advertisers know this. You're not just buying a car, you're buying the idea that you're sophisticated, successful, admired. The product is secondary. The real sale is you to yourself. You're not purchasing an item, you're purchasing an upgrade to your self-image. And that's why you don't even notice the manipulation. Because the lie feels good. And when a lie feels good, it doesn't get questioned, it gets protected. Now think about social media, platforms designed to flatter your every move. Every like, every share, every follower, it's all a mirror, reflecting a curated version of you that's smarter, funnier, more attractive than you ever dared to believe. But it's not you, it's bait, and you're hooked. Because the algorithm understands what even you might not. You crave validation more than you crave truth. And the deeper you fall into that loop, the more easily you can be led. Even ideologies, political, religious, philosophical, flatter their followers. You're not just someone with opinions, you're someone who sees through the lies. Someone who knows better than the sheep. Someone with moral clarity in a world of confusion. You're special, and that feeling, that's the hook. Once that seed is planted, it doesn't matter how absurd the belief system gets. You'll defend it, not because it makes sense, but because it makes you feel like you matter. This is why power thrives on praise. Not truth, not justice. Praise. If someone wanted to control you, they wouldn't insult you. They'd elevate you. They'd make you feel smart, noble, superior. And then when you're wrapped in their compliments, they'd slip in the command, and you'd obey. Not out of fear, but out of pride. Because now it's not about what's true, it's about who you are. And people will do almost anything to protect the version of themselves they've grown to love. That's the power of a flattering lie. And that's why it works better than any threat ever could. Because when someone attacks you, you fight back. But when someone flatters you, you lean in. You lower your defenses. You trust, even when you shouldn't. And once you're in, really in, you'll ignore every red flag. You'll defend the indefensible. You'll lie, not just to others, but to yourself. Because to admit you were fooled isn't just painful, it's humiliating. It means the version of you fell in love with wasn't real. And that's a truth too bitter to swallow. So you hold on to the lie, you nurture it. You become it, because it doesn't just feel good, it feels like home. And that's why flattery is one of the oldest tools of manipulation. Because it doesn't conquer you with force. It convinces you to conquer yourself. Have you ever been in a room where something deeply wrong was said, racist, cruel, flat out false, and no one spoke up? You knew it was wrong. Everyone did. But still, silence, nods, maybe a forced laugh, and you sat there, frozen, not because you agreed, but because you didn't want to be the one who didn't belong. That's the sickness we're born into. Not cowardice, not ignorance, but a desperate, primal hunger to fit in. Belonging feels like safety, like survival, and for most of human history, it was. Being cast out from the tribe meant death, starvation, isolation, predators. So the brain evolved to value acceptance over almost anything else, even truth, even justice. You can feel that evolutionary echo in your chest, can't you? The flutter of anxiety before you speak against the group, the silent calculation. If I say this, will they turn on me? We tell ourselves we're rational creatures, but most people would rather betray their values than their peers. And the more tightly knit the group, the stronger that pull becomes. Religious congregations, political movements, social cliques. The more they promise belonging, the more they demand silence. Think about that. Silence becomes the price of admission. So people stop speaking up, not because they agree, but because they fear exclusion more than they fear being complicit. It starts small. You let a comment slide, you change the subject, you avoid the awkward conversation, and slowly you get used to swallowing your discomfort. You adapt. You learn the rules, what not to say, who not to challenge, which truths are too dangerous to mention. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Until one day, you're not just staying silent. You're performing, nodding, smiling, pretending to believe things you never did. Not to manipulate, not to deceive, but to belong. Because by then, speaking up doesn't just feel risky, it feels like suicide. And here's the twist. The others around you, they're doing the same thing, silently conforming, secretly doubting. Everyone wearing masks, waiting for someone else to go first. You're all pretending, together, alone. This is the hidden architecture of groupthink. Not agreement, but fear. Not unity, but self-preservation. That's why real courage, the kind that actually matters, isn't loud or flashy. It's lonely. It's the quiet decision to say what you believe when no one else will. To risk being labeled difficult, dramatic, divisive. To be the outlier, the exile. The one who doesn't belong, because truth-telling is a threat to any system built on silence. Look at whistleblowers, truth-tellers, dissidents. They're rarely celebrated in their own time. Usually they're destroyed, socially, financially, emotionally. Their crime isn't lying, it's refusing to. And yet, without them, nothing ever changes. So here's the question that haunts you. When the moment comes, when silence equals complicity, will you speak? Not because it's easy, not because it's safe, but because deep down you know the lie of belonging isn't worth the truth of betrayal. Because staying silent to preserve the group means losing yourself. And the longer you stay quiet, the harder it becomes to remember what you even believed in the first place. And maybe that's the most disturbing part. Not that people won't speak up, but that eventually they forget they ever wanted to. Now ask yourself this: what would you risk to stay true, to speak, even if your voice shakes, when the world around you demands your silence? Have you ever watched your name vanish from someone's mouth? Not with malice, not with fire, but with sterile, surgical precision. They don't cancel you. They don't smear you. They just subtract you. Quietly, efficiently. And then, with a straight face, they call it setting boundaries. What sounds healthy, in theory, becomes something much darker in practice. Because sometimes boundaries aren't about protection, they're about power. At first, it feels almost unnoticeable. A missed text, a rescheduled plan, an invitation that never comes. You rationalize it. Life gets busy, people drift. But deep down, something feels different. Intentional, cold. You weren't ghosted, you were edited out. Not loudly, not publicly, just erased, in a way that offers them all the moral high ground. After all, they didn't lash out. They didn't confront you. They just did what's best for their mental health. And who could argue with that? The genius of this kind of social sabotage is its plausibility. It weaponizes the language of wellness. They don't accuse you, they just imply you're toxic. They don't start drama, they just start healing. In a world obsessed with boundaries, it's easy to miss when they become a tool of quiet punishment. Because there's no script for defending yourself against someone else's right to peace. You're not allowed to ask why they cut you off. You're not allowed to question their motives. Doing so makes you seem unstable, obsessive, even dangerous. And so you stay silent. And silence is the point. This is the new social currency. Reputational control through passive omission. No need to defame, just detach. No need to justify, just distance. The more vague the exit, the more powerful it becomes. And the less closure you get, the more suspicious you seem for wanting it. It's a trap. You can't defend yourself against something no one accuses you of. You can't protect your reputation from a whisper campaign that never makes a sound. You just fade. And people call it growth. But let's be honest, sometimes boundaries aren't about safety. They're about control. They're about cutting off your oxygen without laying a finger. They're about forcing you into social exile while everyone claps for their self-care. Because when they destroy your reputation this way, they don't need evidence. They only need implication. A raised eyebrow, a shared look, a vague something happened without ever saying what, just enough smoke to suggest a fire, without lighting a single match. You're left chasing shadows, denying rumors no one admits to spreading, apologizing for harm you don't understand, slowly internalizing guilt for crimes you can't even name. It's gaslighting in slow motion. And what makes it so effective? Everyone thinks they're being healthy. Everyone thinks they're protecting their peace. Everyone thinks they're doing what's right. But what they're really doing is rewriting history in real time. They're turning your kindness into codependence, your care into manipulation, your disagreements into red flags. They're rebranding you as unsafe. And you don't even know it's happening until it's too late. Because no one warns you that boundaries can be a scalpel in the hands of the wrong person. No one teaches you how to recognize when emotional hygiene becomes emotional warfare. But here's the thing. They don't need to destroy you loudly. Quiet destruction is cleaner. It's more socially acceptable. It's impossible to pin down, and that's what makes it terrifying. Because when they finally walk away, they leave behind nothing you can fight. No accusation, no confrontation, just an absence. And the world sees their absence as maturity. Meanwhile, you're left trying to scream in a room that's been soundproofed. But don't forget this. The truth doesn't need to be loud to be real, and silence doesn't always mean guilt. Sometimes it means you were erased for the convenience of someone else's narrative. Sometimes the boundary wasn't about protection, it was about power. And power doesn't need to yell, it just needs you quiet. Imagine a child learning that yelling gets attention, that cruelty, when loud enough, when sudden enough, forces the room to stop and listen. What begins as an outburst becomes a blueprint, a way of being heard in a world that only seems to respond when you're too intense to ignore. Cruelty, in many cases, isn't born from hatred. It's born from invisibility. When someone feels invisible for long enough, overlooked, dismissed, underestimated, they begin rehearsing. Not kindness, not logic, but force. They learn that calmness gets ignored, politeness gets walked over, but anger makes people flinch, makes people listen. It becomes a performance, a desperate one, a rehearsed monologue, not of pain, but of power. And that's the terrifying part. Most cruelty doesn't erupt spontaneously. It's planned, refined, sharpened like a weapon. It's someone practicing how to be taken seriously in a world that only takes you seriously when you're dangerous. And so they become dangerous, not because they want to harm, but because harm is what gets them seen. Think of the boss who humiliates subordinates, the parent who yells instead of explaining, the partner who weaponizes silence. These aren't random acts, they're habits. Learned behaviors that evolve from past attempts to gain control in a world that made them feel powerless. It's not an excuse, but it is an explanation. Cruelty is often the echo of neglect. When a child grows up watching kindness get ignored, boundaries get trampled, vulnerability get punished, they internalize one brutal lesson. Softness is weakness. They stop asking gently. They stop waiting. They stop hoping someone will care enough to listen without being forced to. And that's when the transformation happens. They rehearse cruelty not to hurt, but to matter. To be feared is in their eyes better than being forgotten. This is why cruelty can feel calculated. It often is, because deep down, the cruel person is saying, "I've tried everything else. This is the only thing that worked." And once it works, once they see people flinch, submit, obey, it becomes addictive. They no longer seek connection. They seek compliance. But the real tragedy, they're still invisible. Not to others, but to themselves. They've buried their need for love, so deep beneath their need for control, they can no longer feel it. Their cruelty masks insecurity. Their dominance hides a desperation to be acknowledged without begging for it, to matter without being pitied. In a world that rewards spectacle, cruelty becomes a shortcut to significance, and the cycle continues. They become the very thing they feared. Not weak, but feared for their strength. Not ignored, but avoided for their volatility. They win the attention war, but lose the connection they were always chasing. You've seen this before, maybe in others, maybe in yourself, because cruelty doesn't always look monstrous. Sometimes it wears a business suit. Sometimes it speaks in calm, cutting tones. Sometimes it sounds like someone trying to win an argument, not start a war, but make no mistake, it is a war to be noticed, a war to matter. So next time you encounter cruelty, ask yourself, what are they rehearsing? What pain lies underneath that makes this their only language? And perhaps the most unsettling question, what would it take for you to become them? Cruelty often begins as a defense, but rehearse it long enough and it becomes an identity. And once that happens, the person isn't just trying to be taken seriously anymore. They've forgotten how to be anything else. Imagine this, you're standing in a room with someone who seems fragile, shy, maybe a little scared. They flinch when you speak too loudly. They downplay their intelligence. They ask for help with things they probably could do themselves. They lean on your kindness, your instinct to protect, your human drive to shield the vulnerable. But what if it's all an act? What if weakness itself has become a weapon? In nature, predators use strength, but humans are more sophisticated. In our world, the most dangerous ones often use weakness as camouflage. They pretend to be harmless, so you stop watching them. They act incompetent, so you stop expecting anything. They play small, so you don't realize how much power they're quietly collecting in the shadows. Think about it. The person who seems dependent might actually be learning everything about how you work. Your habits, your insecurities, your blind spots. They play victim, not to gain your pity, but to disarm you. And once your guard is down, once you've exposed your vulnerabilities, they strike. Not with fists, with influence, with leverage, with quiet, careful manipulation that feels like your idea. This isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition. Psychologically, humans are wired to trust those who appear weak. We assume they pose no threat. We lower our defenses, and that's when we're most easily exploited, not by brute force, but by emotional strategy. Look closer at your own life. Have you ever helped someone out of guilt, only to realize later they never truly needed your help? Have you ever given someone the benefit of the doubt, again and again, only to watch them twist every kindness into control? That's the strategy. Feign helplessness. Harvest loyalty. Build a network of protectors who defend you, not because of who you are, but because of who you pretend to be. And it's not just individuals. This tactic scales. In politics, in corporate boardrooms, even in public discourse, those who cry victimhood the loudest are sometimes the ones with the most influence. They weaponize moral high ground. They frame themselves as underdogs while pulling strings behind the scenes. Why? Because nobody suspects the weak. Weakness hides power better than strength ever could. Strength makes you a target. Weakness makes you invisible, and invisibility is power. Once you internalize this, the world starts to look different. That coworker who always forgets their responsibilities. They've trained you to carry their weight. That friend who never quite solves their own problems. They've conditioned you to solve them instead. That public figure who constantly plays the misunderstood outsider. They've built a brand and an empire on your sympathy. The brilliance of this strategy is that it never looks like power. It looks like need. It looks like humility. It looks like innocence. But beneath it lies calculation. This is how empires of influence are built, not with arrogance, but with humility worn like a mask. Not with domination, but with dependence, masquerading as sincerity. And it works because you want to believe in it. You want to think you're helping someone who truly needs you, that you're the good one, that your protection matters. You don't see the control until it's too late, until your time, your energy, your loyalty have already been spent. So how do you protect yourself? Start by watching not just what people say, but what they quietly gain. Who benefits when you step in? Who gains control by giving it up? Who asks for help not to survive, but to dominate without appearing to? Not all weakness is fake, but some of it is strategic. And the cost of ignoring that truth can be devastating. Because while you're busy defending them, they're studying you. While you're focused on their survival, they're engineering your submission. And the most dangerous enemy isn't the one who challenges you head on. It's the one who convinces you they'd never dare. Now ask yourself, who's playing weak around you? And what are they doing while your guard is down? Because the real threat isn't power in plain sight. It's the power you never even see coming. They smile with their head slightly bowed. They speak in soft, measured tones. They deflect praise, redirect credit, and make sure everyone feels seen, everyone but themselves. On the surface, it looks like humility. But if you pay attention, really pay attention, something darker flickers underneath. A calculation, a performance. Because the strongest egos don't always roar. Sometimes they whisper. We've been conditioned to associate humility with virtue. The quiet one must be wise. The unassuming leader must be noble, but the human ego isn't extinguished by silence. It adapts, it disguises itself. And in its most insidious form, it hides behind humility. Fake humility is a weapon, a social lubricant, a method of disarming others while protecting your own self-image. It gives the illusion of selflessness while secretly feeding on validation. It's a bait and switch. By appearing modest, you lower people's defenses. They trust you more, admire you more, and that admiration, subtle, unspoken, is exactly what the ego craves. It's a power move. Real humility is self-forgetting. It's vulnerability without manipulation. But fake humility is strategic. It's designed to control perception. It plays into cultural scripts that reward likability over honesty, deference over dominance. And in doing so, it creates a kind of social camouflage, a way for the powerful to seem harmless, even as they consolidate influence. Consider politicians who frame their rise as service, CEOs who brand their success as luck, public figures who endlessly thank others while quietly controlling every room they enter. Their humility is rehearsed. polished. It's not an absence of ego, it's ego weaponized through restraint. You've seen this play out in the workplace. The colleague who never boasts, but whose every modest comment somehow manages to spotlight their value. The leader who claims they're just part of the team while making every decision unilaterally. These people aren't insecure, they're masters of image control and their humility. It's a script designed to elevate them while making everyone else feel like the praise was their idea. Why does this work so well? Because we want to believe in goodness. We want to trust appearances. We're drawn to those who seem gentle, unassuming, self-sacrificing. And in that desire, we lower our guard. We overlook red flags. We interpret manipulation as grace. The person who flatters us while downplaying themselves feels safer than the one who openly owns their ambition. But that's the trick. That's the illusion. Fake humility doesn't eliminate ego. It perfects it. The strongest egos aren't loud because they don't need to be. They don't chase validation. They orchestrate it. They create environments where their modesty becomes legendary, where people compete to defend their authenticity. They're celebrated not just for what they achieve, but for how effortlessly humble they appear in the process. And all the while, they're collecting power, influence, loyalty. Real humility, by contrast, is almost invisible. It doesn't draw attention. It doesn't curate an image. It doesn't need to. But fake humility is always curated. It's crafted to be noticed. And the moment you start to see the pattern, how this mask is worn when it's deployed, you can't unsee it. Ask yourself, who benefits from appearing humble? Who gets rewarded, trusted, elevated, excused, simply because they don't look power-hungry? And what happens when someone challenges their image? They deflect, they gaslight, they frame themselves as misunderstood. The ego behind the mask rears up, not with aggression, but with wounded virtue. I never asked for this, they'll say. I'm just trying to help. And suddenly, they're the victim. You become the attacker. The roles flip seamlessly. That's the genius of fake humility. It turns criticism into cruelty. It's not the loudest egos you should fear. It's the quiet ones. The ones dressed in modesty, cloaked in charm, moving invisibly through systems of influence. They are harder to spot, harder to resist, and far more dangerous. Because you never see the knife, just the smile that comes before it. And by the time you realize what's happened, they're already 10 steps ahead, apologizing sweetly for a misunderstanding they engineered, offering help for a problem they created, and receiving praise for a humility they never earned. Because in the end, fake humility is just another form of control, not by domination, but by seduction, not by force, but by favor. And it works because we want to believe it. Now ask yourself, how many of the most powerful people you admire seem too humble? And how many of them, quietly, have everyone exactly where they want them? Imagine you're on stage. The spotlight burns your face, and in the silence, hundreds of eyes stare back at you, waiting, expectant. You open your mouth, and you have a choice: speak the truth, or say what they want to hear. And the terrifying part, the lie gets a standing ovation. Incentives. People don't chase truth, they chase rewards. Social, financial, emotional, whatever currency the group values, that's what gets traded. If a lie makes people feel good, feel safe, feel seen, it will always outshine a truth that makes them uncomfortable. That's not cynicism. That's human psychology. The moment applause enters the equation, truth loses leverage, because the claps don't come for accuracy. They come for alignment, agreement, validation. If your truth threatens that harmony, you're not brave, you're disruptive. And most people will do anything to avoid becoming that. It's not that they don't know the truth, it's that they see what it costs: fear of rejection. Have you ever noticed how quickly silence follows a dissenting opinion? Not because people disagree, but because they're watching, measuring, deciding if it's safe to align with you. Every truth carries a social risk, and humans are tribal, deeply, desperately. To speak the truth is to flirt with exile, and exile in the primitive brain equals death. That's why the applause matters so much. It's not just noise, it's safety, belonging. It's the sound of "you're still one of us." And that's intoxicating, that's addicting. That's why they lie, to stay in the room. False virtue, worse still, we've learned to moralize the lie. Watch what happens when someone says the comforting thing, the easy thing, the thing that flatters the group. They're praised, elevated, called compassionate, inclusive, courageous, even. It doesn't matter that it's untrue. What matters is how it feels. So now the lie isn't just accepted, it's celebrated. Telling people what they want to hear isn't seen as manipulation anymore. It's seen as empathy, as kindness. And those who persist in truth-telling, they're labeled cold, harsh, divisive. It's no longer about right or wrong. It's about social lubrication. The truth grinds them to a halt. The cult of consensus. We've made consensus the highest moral good. Agreement is seen as peace, unity. So the lie that unites becomes sacred, protected. Anyone who threatens it is dangerous, even if they're right. This is how societies build myths. False narratives repeated so often, so loudly, so confidently, that truth doesn't just get ignored, it gets erased. Because in the cult of consensus, noise beats accuracy. Every time, people will parrot the lie, not because they believe it, but because they believe in what it buys them: peace, protection, approval. And so the lie becomes the truth, not by fact, but by volume. Addiction to applause. There's something you need to understand about applause. It's a drug. Once someone tastes it, they will do anything to get it again. Change their message, contort their beliefs, rewrite their own memories, just to hear that sound. The clapping doesn't just affirm the lie, it rewires the liar. They begin to believe it too. Because cognitive dissonance is painful and identity is fragile. If who you are is applauded for saying X, then eventually you become the person who says X. No matter how false it is, the mind hates contradiction. So it bends, warps, rationalizes, until the mask fuses with the face. Self-betrayal. But here's the cost. The more you lie for applause, the more you lose track of who you were before the audience arrived. You become a product of approval, a puppet of the crowd. And the scary part, you might not even notice, because the lie doesn't feel like a lie anymore. It feels like survival. It feels like success. You were just being agreeable, just avoiding conflict, just doing what was expected. But underneath, something rots. Your integrity, your authenticity, your connection to your own thoughts. Until you wake up one day and realize you've been clapping too at someone else's lie. Because it's easier than confronting the truth you buried. So what happens when no one wants the truth anymore? What happens when the applause drowns out reality entirely? What happens when even you forget what was true in the first place? That's when power wins. And that's where we go next, to the unsettling truth that people will betray almost anything, including themselves, for just a taste of it. They won't say, "I'm sorry I hurt you." They'll say, "I'm sorry you're upset." Then in that slight twist of language, they reveal everything. This isn't an apology, it's a deflection. a carefully crafted illusion of remorse, engineered not to repair the damage, but to reclaim control. Real remorse is rare, because real remorse demands surrender. It demands that the person who caused harm steps down from the pedestal of self-justification and admits fully and without defense, "I did this, I was wrong, and I have no excuse." But people don't want to be wrong. They want to be in control, so they perform guilt. They mimic vulnerability. They use the language of regret as a weapon, not a bridge. Not because they understand the pain they caused, but because they're losing their grip on the narrative. This is the power of control. It doesn't just crave dominance over others, it craves authorship. It wants to write the story, shape the characters, and assign the roles. And when you resist that script, when you step outside the frame they tried to place you in, that's when the apology appears. Not out of empathy, out of desperation, not because they feel guilty, because they feel exposed. Control addicts hate unpredictability. Your anger, your silence, your refusal to play along, it disrupts their illusion. It breaks the spell, and to regain it, they do the only thing they think might work. They say what they think you want to hear. But listen closely. The apology isn't about you. It's about re-establishing their grip. Forgiveness becomes a transaction. They say sorry, you let go. Not because justice has been done, but because the script demands resolution. It's clean, controlled, contained. But healing doesn't live in performance. It lives in accountability. And that terrifies them, because accountability isn't about what they say, it's about what they change. And real change means loss of power, loss of the high ground, loss of the comforting lie that they were always the victim, always the misunderstood hero. True remorse forces them to step into discomfort and stay there, to give up the illusion that their intentions matter more than their impact. But power can't stand still. It can't bear submission. So instead, they offer you a counterfeit, a hollow echo of regret, just enough to make you question your instincts, just enough to make you second-guess the boundaries you set, just enough to make you wonder, am I being too harsh? But you're not. You're just not letting them win. And that's the one thing they can't forgive. Because for people obsessed with power, forgiveness isn't a gift you give. It's a prize they seize. Another tool in the box, another rung on the ladder, back to dominance. So when they say, "I'm sorry," look at their eyes. Are they soft with understanding, or hard with calculation? Are they asking to make things right, or just to make things quiet again? Because when regret is real, it humbles. But when it's not, it manipulates. It bends itself around your pain, not to soothe it, but to erase it, to make you forget, to make you doubt. Because nothing frightens someone who craves control more than the moment you see through them, the moment you stop reacting the way they expect, the moment they realize they're not the one holding the pen anymore. You know what's more powerful than dominance? Being indispensable. Not feared, not admired, but needed, truly needed. Think about the most influential people in your life. Now strip away the charisma, the aggression, the loud opinions. What are you left with? The ones you can't function without. The ones who've embedded themselves so deeply into your routines, your dependencies, your identity, that imagining life without them feels like cutting off a limb. That's real power, and it's invisible. See, we've been taught to associate power with strength, control, command. We think of dominance, alphas in boardrooms, military dictators, billionaires barking orders. But that's only one face of power, the obvious one, the loudest one. And because it's so loud, we often miss the quieter, subtler form, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but commands permanence. Needing someone makes you vulnerable, and the person you need They don't have to threaten you. They don't even have to ask. You'll bend for them. Adjust, justify their presence, because their absence would feel like a crisis. And here's the twisted part. You might not even resent it. You might call it love, loyalty, dependence, but it's power, just hidden in plain sight. Now picture a workplace. Who holds the real leverage? The boss who yells, or the colleague who knows every system, every workaround, every unspoken rule that keeps the place from collapsing? You can replace a bully, but not the person everyone turns to when things break, or consider family. There's often one person who becomes the emotional glue, the one everyone vents to, leans on, relies on to fix the unfixable. They rarely raise their voice. They don't impose, but try ignoring them. Try removing them. You'll see the entire structure start to tremble. Need isn't just emotional, it's logistical, structural, strategic, and the terrifying truth. You can be controlled by someone you believe you're protecting, by someone you think needs you more. Because once you've tied your identity to being needed, you'll do anything to preserve that role. Even sacrifice yourself. Even silence yourself. That's how inverted this power dynamic becomes. The person being helped slowly becomes the one in control, not by force, but by function. This kind of power doesn't dominate, it entangles, and that's why it's dangerous. You don't see it coming. You don't label it as manipulation. You call it duty, or obligation, or love. But deep down, your choices are no longer your own. You're moving around someone else's gravity, and the more they need you, or make you believe they do, the more trapped you become in orbit. This is why some of the most controlling people in the world never raise their voice. They don't have to. Their power isn't in dominance, it's in indispensability. They become the keystone in your psychological architecture. Pull them out, and your whole sense of self begins to crumble. We rarely talk about this because it doesn't look like power. It looks like care. It looks like intimacy. It looks like loyalty. But make no mistake, it is control. And once you realize this, once you start scanning your life for who actually holds power over you, you'll stop looking at the loud ones, the dominant ones. You'll start looking at the ones you can't imagine losing. Because being needed isn't always love. Sometimes it's leverage. And sometimes the person with the quietest voice is the one pulling the deepest strings. Have you ever noticed that people will do anything, absolutely anything, for followers? They'll fake relationships, buy fake friends, lie, cheat, provoke. They'll overshare trauma, perform joy, simulate outrage, all for one thing: attention. Not love, not connection, just attention. Measurable, addictive attention. The kind that shows up in metrics, in numbers, in followers. Because in this world, followers are currency. Their influence, their proof. Then more and more, they're the only proof that matters. This isn't just narcissism, it's survival. When you live in a world that rewards visibility more than virtue, being seen becomes more important than being loved. And that changes everything. Love is slow, it's intimate. It's built in private, in quiet moments, in mutual sacrifice. But followers are fast, loud, quantifiable, public. Love asks you to show up, even when no one's watching. Followers demand you perform constantly, whether it's real or not. And here's the twisted truth. Society doesn't reward love anymore. It rewards visibility, popularity, the illusion of connection, not the real thing. So people adapt. They optimize themselves not to be loved, but to be followed. They become brands instead of humans. They curate their identity, market their personality, and tailor their vulnerability for maximum engagement. Even sadness becomes content. Even grief becomes a campaign. And slowly, quietly, love starts to feel inefficient. It doesn't scale. It doesn't trend. It doesn't give you leverage. Followers do, because in a digital world, followers can get you a job. They can get you invited. They can get you paid. They can protect you from obscurity, irrelevance, and worst of all, being forgotten. So love becomes a risk, a distraction, something to pursue only after you've secured status. But what no one says out loud is this: the pursuit of followers replaces the pursuit of intimacy, and we start to forget how to love, truly love. We forget how to sit in silence with someone and not feel the need to share it. We forget how to tell the truth when it won't get likes. We forget how to stay when there's no audience clapping. Because love doesn't reward you, not publicly, not algorithmically. It demands presence, not performance. It requires discomfort, patience, honesty, and those qualities. They don't trend well. So people learn to perform their feelings instead of experiencing them. They master the look of love, the language of connection, the visual grammar of closeness, without ever letting themselves be truly seen. Because being seen is dangerous. It risks rejection. Being followed, on the other hand, that's safe. That's curated. That's distant. And the more followers we gain, the lonelier we become. Because followers don't hold you when you break down at midnight. They don't sit next to you in silence when the world collapses. They don't love you in the small, boring, sacred ways. They consume you, and yet we keep craving them. More than love, more than truth, more than each other, because somewhere along the way we stopped believing that love is enough. We started believing that love without an audience isn't real. But it is. It always was. The tragedy is that we're forgetting how to recognize it. And in that forgetting, we've become addicted to a mirror that never reflects who we really are, just who we want others to think we are. And maybe the scariest part, we prefer it that way, because real love would mean facing the parts of ourselves that likes can't fix and followers can't validate. And that's the kind of attention we're most afraid of, the kind that sees us. Have you ever noticed how silence can say more than words ever could? Not the peaceful silence of a quiet room or the shared stillness between friends, but the kind of silence that's calculated, strategic, the kind that makes you doubt yourself, makes you shrink, makes you question whether your voice was ever meant to matter in the first place. To some people, silence is a weapon, but not in the obvious way. It's not loud or violent. It doesn't slam doors or shout over you. No, this silence is colder, more refined. It's the silence of withheld acknowledgement, of unanswered messages, of eyes that slide right past you like you don't exist. This silence isn't passive. It's a performance of power. Think about the meetings where your ideas are ignored until someone else repeats them louder. The relationships where your concerns are met with blank stares. The institutions that bury your pleas for help beneath layers of protocol and bureaucracy. It's not just absence, it's erasure. And it's intentional, because silence in the right hands becomes a form of control. It's about hierarchy, about establishing who gets to speak and who doesn't, who gets the floor and who stays in the margins. The silence you're given becomes a cage, and slowly you start decorating it. Convinced it's your fault, you're locked inside. You internalize it. You start speaking less, thinking less of yourself. You begin to assume your questions are unworthy, your presence unnecessary. And that's exactly the goal. The silence isn't just there to suppress you, it's there to reshape you, to bend you into a quieter, smaller version of who you were meant to be. Now, here's the disturbing part. People in power rarely silence you directly. They let the silence do it for them. No confrontation, no scene, just distance, indifference, absence. Because that kind of silence is harder to fight. You can't argue with what was never said. You can't confront someone who never acknowledged you to begin with. It becomes a psychological trap, a mind game with no rules and no referee. And slowly you begin playing it against yourself. You hesitate before speaking. You water down your ideas. You ask for less, expect less. And eventually you stop showing up at all. Because what's the point of screaming into silence when all it does is echo back your own self-doubt? That's the genius of it. Silence doesn't need to raise its voice to dominate you. It only needs time. Time to convince you that your silence is a choice, that you prefer the background, that you were never meant to stand in the light. But here's what they don't want you to realize. Silence isn't just something that happens to you. It's something you can break. Because the moment you speak, really speak, you disrupt the illusion. You make yourself visible, real, present, and power hates that. It hates when silence stops being comfortable, when the quiet stops working. You were never meant to live beneath someone else's silence. You were meant to speak so clearly that their silence becomes unbearable. And once you see that, you can never unsee it. Now, let's talk about the next layer of this control. Because sometimes it's not just silence that holds you down, it's the comfort you're offered in its place. They'll make you compete for attention and call it love. Love is supposed to feel safe, intimate, reciprocal. But what if I told you that most of what we're taught to call love is actually a stage for psychological warfare, a high-stakes game of attention, validation, and conditional affection? From the moment we first crave love, we're taught one thing above all: earn it. Be good, be quiet, be impressive. Dance for it, starve for it, compete for it. Because love, as it's often given, is not unconditional. It's transactional, and the currency is your identity. Now picture this: a child in a family where affection isn't steady, it's sporadic. Mom praises you when you get straight, as dad claps when you win the game, but fail, stumble, show weakness. The warmth disappears. Suddenly, you're invisible. The message is subtle but clear. Your worth is conditional. Your visibility depends on performance. That child grows up, learns the rules. Attention is not a birthright, it's a prize, and to win it, you must outperform others. Be smarter, prettier, more agreeable. Outshine your siblings. Outshine your friends. Outshine yourself. All for a crumb of affection masquerading as love. This isn't love. It's a competition, disguised as care. A rigged game that trains you to believe love must be earned through sacrifice, suppression, and self-erasure. In school, the stakes get higher. The teacher smiles at the student who excels, not the one who struggles. You notice who gets chosen, who gets praised, who gets remembered, and a quiet belief forms: to be loved, you must win. Every day becomes a pageant. Every moment, a test. Social media makes it worse. Here, attention is quantified: likes, hearts, views. Validation becomes visible. You scroll past curated lives, filtered perfection, performative happiness, and you start performing too. Not just online, but everywhere. Smiling when you're empty, flirting when you feel nothing, being whatever gets the most eyes on you. Because invisibility is terrifying. Romantic relationships echo the same cycle. You meet someone. At first, they give freely: attention, compliments, affection. You feel seen, whole. Then, slowly, it changes. Their attention becomes scarce, conditional. You feel them pull away unless you become something more attractive, more successful, more agreeable. And without realizing it, you shift. You become a version of yourself, designed to keep them interested. What's happening isn't romance, it's reinforcement. You're being trained again to earn love through obedience and performance. The more you compete, the less you recognize yourself. The more you win, the more hollow you feel. This isn't just individual manipulation, it's systemic conditioning. The culture trains us to tie our worth to how much attention we can capture. From media to marketing to relationships, love is sold as something rare, something earned, something that comes only to those who compete hardest. But here's the twisted brilliance of it. By making you compete for love, they ensure your loyalty, your desperation, your silence. Because the moment you believe love can be lost, you'll do anything to keep it. You'll betray your values. You'll endure cruelty. You'll turn on others, especially those who threaten your place in the hierarchy of affection. Sibling rivalries, workplace jealousy, friendship fractures. They're not natural. They're engineered, designed to fracture solidarity, to pit you against the people who might otherwise stand beside you, all because the system told you there's only so much love to go around, and you believed it. But real love, actual love, isn't a competition. It doesn't vanish when you fail. It doesn't shrink when others succeed. It expands. Real love is unconditional presence, unshakable regard. The kind that says you matter even when you're broken. The kind that doesn't ask you to dance for it. So why don't we see more of that kind of love? Because unconditional love is dangerous to systems of control. It creates self-worth that can't be manipulated. People who feel truly loved don't chase validation. They don't betray each other for attention. They resist. They stand still. They say no. And that's why they teach us that love is earned, that you must compete for it. Because if you stopped believing that, you'd become uncontrollable. You'd become whole. You'd become whole. Imagine a game where the rules are sacred until the referee decides to play. Suddenly, the boundaries blur. The whistle doesn't blow. Fouls vanish, and the same hands that enforced the rules now break them with impunity. That's not a game anymore. That's domination. This is what power does. It doesn't just bend the rules. It makes you believe the bend was always there. Power doesn't announce its corruption. It cloaks it in justification. When someone without power breaks the rules, they're punished, ostracized, shamed. But when the powerful do it, they're making tough decisions. They're protecting order. They're doing what's necessary. It's not hypocrisy. It's hierarchy. Because the moment someone acquires enough influence, the moral architecture rearranges itself around them. Suddenly, things that were once wrong become strategic. Actions that would have triggered outrage now provoke applause. What used to be betrayal is rebranded as leadership. But don't confuse this for moral evolution. It's not progress, it's privilege masquerading as wisdom. Think about every scandal you've watched unfold. Politicians caught lying, corporations exposed for harm, institutions failing those they're meant to serve. The first response isn't accountability, it's containment, damage control, reframing the narrative. The goal isn't to make things right, it's to preserve power. And if that means rewriting the rules mid-game, so be it. Even more disturbing is how effortlessly we accept it. We expect the powerful to cheat. We rationalize it, internalize it, even defend it. That's just how the world works, we tell ourselves. As if cynicism is a shield, as if resignation is wisdom. But that's not awareness, it's surrender. Because when power breaks the rules and gets away with it, it's not just bending morality, it's reshaping reality. You start to question your own outrage. You wonder if maybe they know something you don't. Maybe they see the bigger picture. Maybe you're just naive. That's the trick. Power doesn't just control the laws, it controls perception. It teaches you that challenging the rule breaker is riskier than staying silent. That fairness is idealistic. That resistance is futile. And so the game continues, rigged, relentless, recursive. Even language itself begins to mutate. Lies become miscommunication. Oppression becomes security. The truth doesn't disappear. It's drowned in euphemism. Meanwhile, the rule followers, the decent, the disciplined, the idealists, are mocked for their principles, told they're too rigid, too emotional, too unrealistic. Their loyalty to fairness becomes a liability. Their morality becomes a punchline. Because in a world where the powerful rewrite the rules, being good isn't noble, it's naive. But here's what they don't expect. That clarity breeds rebellion. That once you see the manipulation, you can't unsee it. That knowing the game is rigged doesn't mean you have to play along. It means you start asking better questions. You start noticing who gets silenced and who gets a stage, who gets punished for breaking the rules and who gets promoted, who needs to justify their every move and who walks freely between contradiction and excuse. You start to realize that power protects itself not with strength, but with confusion, with complexity, with contradiction. It makes everything murky, so you stop trying to find the truth. But the truth is still there. The rules change when they're the ones breaking them. Not because the rules themselves are flexible, but because power never plays by rules. It writes them, erases them, redraws them as needed. And until we stop mistaking control for justice, manipulation for wisdom, and privilege for merit, we'll keep mistaking rule breakers for leaders and integrity for weakness. Because the most dangerous thing about power isn't that it corrupts, it's that it convinces you it never did. You saw the manipulation, you felt it crawl under your skin. But the moment they wrapped it in safety, in warmth, in familiarity, you forgave it. Not out loud, not consciously, but deep down you told yourself it was okay because they made you feel safe. That's how it works. Not with fists or shouting, not with threats, but with quiet reassurances, subtle glances, and just enough comfort to make you second-guess your own instincts. Manipulation isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper wrapped in a hug. They didn't demand your trust. They earned it, strategically. They paid attention, memorized your insecurities, your fears, your triggers. And when the moment came, they didn't confront you. They protected you. Or at least they made you believe they did. Maybe they defended you in public. Maybe they listened when no one else did. Maybe they just stayed when others left. It felt rare, precious. So when their behavior turned, just a little, you gave them the benefit of the doubt. You told yourself they were having a bad day, that you were being too sensitive, that real relationships are hard. But the truth was simpler. You were excusing manipulation because it came wrapped in the illusion of safety. There's a term for this: trauma bonding. It doesn't always require overt abuse. Sometimes it just takes inconsistent reinforcement, moments of validation spliced between confusion, affection laced with control, love that only flows when you're compliant. Your nervous system can't tell the difference. It registers safety where there is routine, and if the routine includes manipulation, then that becomes your baseline. Think about how it feels, the drop in your stomach when they withdraw, the rush of relief when they smile again, the subtle fear that disagreement might cost you their affection. That's not connection. That's conditioning. And yet you stay. Not because you're weak, but because they've convinced you it's safe here. Because leaving feels more dangerous than staying. Because the manipulation has woven itself so deeply into the fabric of your emotional world that pulling one thread might unravel everything. They may not even know they're doing it. Or maybe they do. Maybe they've mastered the performance of care. Maybe they learned long ago that control is easiest when people feel chosen, protected, special. The manipulation hides behind the compliment, behind the "I'm just trying to help," behind the "you know I only want what's best for you." But here's the most dangerous part. You believe them. You want to. Because believing them means you're still safe. Because if they're manipulating you, then everything you've built, everything you've trusted, starts to rot. So you excuse it. You rationalize. You reframe their control as concern, their criticism as insight, their rules as love. You become your own jailer. But here's the truth you've been avoiding. Safety shouldn't cost you your autonomy. Protection shouldn't come with a price tag of silence. Love, real love, should never require your obedience. Manipulation doesn't feel like manipulation when you're craving safety. It feels like guidance, like care, like home. But not all homes are safe. Some are just familiar cages with softer walls. But at the moment you realize this, really realize it, is the moment their power begins to fracture. Because manipulation only works when it's invisible. Once you name it, once you see it, it begins to lose its grip, and you begin to reclaim something sacred, your right to feel safe without being controlled. Most status games don't happen under spotlights. They don't come with applause, awards, or viral recognition. No, most status games happen in whispers. They unfold behind closed doors, in side glances, in the space between what's said and what's meant. If you're only watching the stage, you're already missing the real performance. Status, in its rawest form, isn't about fame, it's about hierarchy. Power, position, and the most effective way to climb it isn't to announce your ambition, it's to quietly reshape the ladder. In workplaces, for example, the loudest voice rarely holds the most influence. It's the one who subtly redirects conversations. The one who casually drops a name at the right moment. The one who speaks last, not loudest. They play the long game, whispering just enough to tilt the room in their favor without anyone noticing. This isn't accidental. It's strategic silence, because overt power grabs provoke resistance. But suggestion, implication that sinks in quietly, unchallenged. Look at social circles. Notice how reputations shift not with confrontation, but with rumors. A half smile, a well-timed joke, a shared secret. These are the tools. One whispered doubt about someone's integrity can do more damage than a direct accusation ever could. Private, honest. But here's the irony. The more subtle the manipulation, the more powerful its effect. Think of how status is controlled in family systems. Who gets heard, who gets dismissed, who always ends up apologizing. These aren't formal rules, they're invisible rituals. Unspoken expectations, reinforced through subtle pressure, a raised eyebrow, a withheld compliment, a sigh that cuts deeper than any word. You don't have to be told your place to know where it is. And that's what makes whisper-level status games so dangerous. They rarely feel like games at all. They feel like instincts. Natural order, but they're not. They're constructed carefully, deliberately, by those who understand the mechanics of quiet control. This is the realm of the socially fluent, the ones who master tone over content, timing over logic. They weaponize ambiguity, letting others draw the damaging conclusions themselves. You can't fight a ghost, and that's what they become, shaping perception without leaving fingerprints. This is why status isn't just about who has power. It's about who controls the narrative of power, who defines what matters, who decides what's desirable, respected, or shameful. And that brings us to the most disturbing part. You're probably playing this game without realizing it. Ever hesitated to share an opinion because someone else in the room might disapprove? That's the game. Ever complimented someone strategically, not sincerely? That's the game. Ever let someone else take the blame, just by staying silent? That's the game. It's not always malicious, but it's almost always manipulative. Because the modern social world doesn't reward authenticity, it rewards advantage. Not the truth you tell, but the version that positions you better. Not the connections you value, but the ones that elevate your standing. This creates a paradox. The more honest you are, the more vulnerable you become. But the more you perform, the more status you can accumulate. Until, eventually, the whisper becomes your native language. Subtext replaces speech. Presence replaces principle, and it's addictive. Every nod, every agreement, every slight tilt in your favor, it feeds a hunger that never fully goes away. Status doesn't satisfy. It intoxicates. You want more, always more. So the next time you're in a room, and everything feels calm on the surface, listen closer, watch more carefully. The real power struggle isn't the debate happening in public, it's the quiet recalibration of who matters, who belongs, who rises. Because the loudest person may win the argument, but the quietest one often wins the game. And by the time you notice, it's already too late. You've been outplayed and never even heard the rules. Imagine a man standing in court. Everyone knows he lied. The facts are there, clear, public, irrefutable. But instead of punishment, he walks out smiling. Why? Because the lie helped them, the right people, the powerful ones. And when a lie serves power, truth becomes negotiable. This is the uncomfortable logic of loyalty. Lies on their own are dangerous. But when a lie serves the goals of those in power, it's no longer seen as betrayal, it's seen as strategy. Suddenly, it's clever, justified, even admirable. And the liar, they're not a criminal, they're a team player. You've seen this play out before. A company hides toxic data from the public. Executives lie during interviews. Politicians fabricate stories to manufacture support. And when caught, there's outrage, sure, but not from the inner circle. The ones benefiting from the deception close ranks, offer praise, reward silence. The lie, no matter how harmful, is protected because it feeds the machine. It's not about right or wrong. It's about utility. Think of a soldier who lies to justify a war. If the war achieves its objective, the lie becomes a footnote. Think of a CEO who manipulates financial reports to keep investors happy. If the company thrives, the dishonesty is brushed aside. What matters isn't the falsehood, it's the outcome. And if the outcome empowers the powerful, the lie becomes sacred. This is the quiet contract. If your deception benefits the system will protect you. Punishment isn't based on principle, it's based on position. If you lie and fail, you'll be crucified. But if you lie and succeed, if your lie strengthens the hand of those already in control, you become untouchable. Morality is flexible when it serves the agenda. Justice bends when it's inconvenient. And truth becomes a luxury, reserved for the moments it doesn't interfere with power. The terrifying part is how this normalizes corruption. When lies are only punished based on their effectiveness, not their ethical weight, it creates a culture of strategic dishonesty. People stop asking, "Is it right?" and start asking, "Will it work?" The incentive shifts. Integrity is no longer a virtue, it's a liability. And slowly, the entire system reorients itself around what can be gotten away with. Loyalty replaces truth. You're rewarded not for being honest, but for being useful. You become valuable not by speaking the truth, but by staying silent at the right time, by saying what needs to be said, even if it's false, because someone more powerful than you needs that lie to live. The higher you rise, the more this becomes your job, not to illuminate the truth, but to defend the illusion. And if you dare to break that pattern, if you speak the truth when it hurts the system, you're not praised, you're destroyed. Whistleblowers aren't treated like heroes. They're exiled, humiliated, ruined, because their honesty threatens the machinery of convenience. Their truth strips the system of its excuses, its illusions, its armor, and that's unforgivable. So ask yourself, if lies are rewarded and truth is punished, what kind of society are we building? A society where power isn't tethered to accountability, where loyalty outweighs justice, where morality is dictated not by what's right, but by who benefits. This isn't an anomaly, it's a design. And the scariest part, most people play along, they rationalize it. They say it's just politics, just business, just survival, because deep down they know the truth. If you want to succeed in a system built on selective honesty, you must learn to lie the right way, to the right people, at the right time. That's the price of power. You tell yourself it was love, that aching magnetic pull, the way you leaned into their every word, how their silence stung more than shouting ever could. But what if it wasn't love? What if what you felt, what you've mistaken over and over, wasn't connection at all? What if it was control? Control masquerades as intimacy more often than we like to admit. It feels close, it feels warm, it feels like someone finally sees you. But there's a cost buried in that gaze. A quiet, creeping price you don't notice until you're already paying it. It starts small, a suggestion, a correction, a joke that cuts a little too close. They say it's just honesty. They say you're too sensitive. And you, desperate to hold on to the closeness, shrink just a little to fit the shape they prefer. You don't even notice you're changing. You just want the warmth back. We're trained to mistake control for connection because control mimics care. When someone monitors you, checks in constantly, gets jealous easily, it feels like attention. Obsession feels flattering at first. Possessiveness disguises itself as passion. Possessiveness disguises itself as passion. You confuse their need for power with your need to be needed. And when you finally realize what's happening, it's already tangled around you. Because control doesn't come with a warning label. It comes dressed in love languages. It buys you gifts. It listens strategically. It knows just enough about your wounds to make you believe it's healing them, when it's actually using them. The human brain is wired to crave connection, but it's also wired to obey patterns, especially familiar ones. And if the first time you ever felt wanted came from someone who also made you feel small, uncertain, or afraid, you may have learned to seek control under the illusion of love. Again and again, you'll call it fate, chemistry, a cosmic bond. But really, it's trauma in disguise. When control is mistaken for connection, the most dangerous thing is that it feels good, right up until it doesn't. You don't question the rules they set for you. You thank them for the boundaries. You believe that compromise means self-erasure. You forget who you were before their love began, rewriting your script. And the more you mistake control for connection, the more connection itself becomes distorted. You start to believe that real love hurts, that intimacy demands sacrifice, that to be close is to be consumed. That's not love. That's programming. And the scariest part, you might start doing it to others, not because you're cruel, but because it's all you've ever known. You begin to monitor, correct, manage, not out of malice, but fear. You fear abandonment so deeply. You try to control people into staying, and then call it devotion. This isn't just romantic, it's everywhere. Friendships, workplaces, families, parents do it to children, leaders do it to followers. The system does it to citizens. And all of it is coated in the language of love, loyalty, and care. All of it sells control as a kind of closeness. But real connection doesn't require submission. It doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't silence your instincts or punish your boundaries. Real connection is mutual. It breathes. It doesn't tighten around your neck the moment you resist. It doesn't love you less when you disagree. It doesn't make you choose between honesty and harmony. So ask yourself, why have you mistaken control for connection more than once? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you name it, you can finally stop needing it. And that leads us to something even harder to admit. Maybe you weren't just fooled. Maybe you were complicit. Maybe part of you knew it wasn't real connection, but you accepted it anyway. Because it was better than loneliness, because it was familiar, because it was safe. And there's no shame in that. Only understanding, but from that understanding must come clarity. Control dressed as connection will always offer you a counterfeit version of love. It will never set you free. It will feed your loneliness just enough to keep you coming back, but never enough to make you whole. The antidote, not more closeness, but more truth. Because once you understand the difference, the real thing stops being so hard to recognize. Have you ever met someone who cried with you? Felt your pain so vividly, it almost seemed like their own? You might have thought, finally, someone who gets it. But what if that empathy wasn't real? What if it was a mirror, perfectly placed to reflect your suffering back at you, not out of compassion, but calculation? We call it mirroring, and it's one of the most disturbing forms of manipulation because it doesn't feel like control, it feels like connection. Mirroring. Mirroring is the art of becoming you, your gestures, your tone, your beliefs, even your trauma. It's how predators slip past your defenses without you ever realizing you had them. They don't argue with you. They agree. They don't challenge your story. They echo it. You don't see a stranger. You see yourself looking back at you with warmth and understanding. This tactic is especially potent because human beings are wired for resonance. When someone mirrors our pain, it activates the deepest parts of our trust circuitry. We think, they understand me, when what we should be thinking is, why do they understand me so well so quickly? Empathy feels safe, but in the hands of the wrong person, it's not a bridge, it's a trap. The wounded savior illusion. Here's the darkest twist. The most skilled manipulators often present themselves as wounded. They've been hurt too. They've been betrayed, abandoned, gaslit. And when you hear their story, it sounds eerily like yours. That's not an accident. It's a weapon. By mirroring your pain, they bypass skepticism. They earn your trust, not by proving themselves through time and action, but by emotionally binding themselves to your narrative. Their wounds become evidence. I've been through this too, becomes the unspoken contract. But underneath that, something colder lurks. I know your pain. I know how to use it. This creates a sick inversion. You open up, thinking you're building mutual understanding, when in fact, you're supplying ammunition. The more you reveal, the deeper they embed themselves. Covert contracts. Once trust is established through mirroring, the real manipulation begins. But it doesn't look like coercion. It looks like reciprocity. They listened to you, supported you, resonated with your sorrow, and now unconsciously you owe them. You start compromising your boundaries. You make excuses for their behavior. You defend them to others. Why? because you believe this bond was forged in pain. You believe it's rare, sacred, but it's not. It's manufactured. These covert contracts work because they're never spoken aloud. You're never told you have to return the favor, but you feel it. You feel indebted, trapped in an emotional agreement you never consented to. And that's the genius of it. You'll protect them, even as they hurt you. Weaponized empathy. This is empathy weaponized, a counterfeit version of intimacy used to hijack your instincts. It's not about mutual understanding. It's about power. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is to untangle, because the pain they mirrored back to you becomes fused with your identity. If you walk away, it feels like betrayal, not just of them, but of your own story. And that's the psychological prison. They make you feel like leaving them is abandoning yourself. So you stay, you rationalize. You tell yourself they're just hurting. You excuse their volatility, their control, their subtle cruelty, because it all seems wrapped in trauma. But here's the truth. Real empathy doesn't bind, it frees. Real understanding doesn't extract loyalty, it earns it. Power behind the tears. It's easy to believe that power always looks like dominance, loud, aggressive, commanding. But some of the most dangerous power is soft, gentle, tear-streaked. Because when someone weeps with you, you let them in. And once they're in, they don't have to demand control. You'll hand it over willingly, piece by piece, believing it's trust when it's actually surrender. This is what people will do for power, not brute force, but emotional mimicry, not violence, but vulnerability performed like a role, refined through experience, deployed with precision. And the most chilling part, it works, again and again, because we want to believe people who mirror us. We want to believe someone understands. We crave that reflection, that connection, that relief. But not all pain is honest, and not every tear is earned. Sometimes they're just the opening act, and just when you think you're safe, you'll learn the truth. The deepest betrayals begin with shared wounds. Guilt is one of the most powerful emotional levers ever invented. Not because it punishes wrongdoing, but because it persuades you to surrender, to comply, to break yourself into pieces for someone else's comfort. And the moment guilt is placed in the hands of someone with a story, someone who knows how to use that story as a weapon, you become defenseless. It starts with a narrative, something painful, something heartbreaking. Maybe it's true, maybe it isn't. That's not the point. The point is how the story makes you feel. You're pulled in. You imagine their suffering. You start to see them not just as a person, but as a victim. And suddenly, your instincts change. You lower your guard. You don't want to hurt them. You want to help. You want to make it right. Even if it was never your fault to begin with, that's the first cut. You take on pain that doesn't belong to you. But it doesn't stop there. Because once you've accepted the guilt, once you've agreed to carry the weight, they don't have to ask for obedience. You offer it willingly. You become afraid of hurting them again, of triggering their trauma, of appearing insensitive. They don't have to control you directly. They just have to remind you of the story, of what they've been through, of how much you owe and guilt makes you pay. Not once, not with interest, but endlessly, because you're not just paying for what you did, you're paying for who you are, for what they suffered, for every imagined harm that could be traced back to your silence, your inaction, your existence. Guilt becomes a subscription model of emotional servitude. You keep giving, not because they demand it, but because you can't bear the idea of being the bad one. And that's the trap, because guilt doesn't require evidence. It doesn't care about intention. It bypasses logic and speaks directly to your need to be seen as good. That's what makes it dangerous. When someone knows your moral reflex is better than you do, they can hijack them, turning your empathy into obedience, your compassion into chains. But here's what makes it worse. The story, the one they use to elicit guilt, becomes sacred. You're not allowed to question it. You're not allowed to doubt its details or ask whether your guilt is justified. If you do, you're accused of cruelty, of gaslighting, of violence. The story becomes a shield they hide behind and a sword they stab with. And just like that, guilt becomes a prison with no trial and no release date. Because guilt thrives in silence. In shame, in your unwillingness to say, "This isn't mine to carry." You convince yourself it's noble to endure, that real love means sacrifice, that empathy means surrender. But what if that's the lie? What if real strength is being able to say no, even to a story that breaks your heart? What if the most dangerous thing isn't someone else's pain, but their ability to make it your responsibility? We've been taught to believe that guilt makes us moral, that it keeps us in line. But morality, built on guilt, is not morality. It's fear, it's manipulation, it's control, masquerading as virtue. And when wielded by someone with a story, someone who knows just how to trigger your empathy, it becomes a weapon you turn on yourself. And the deeper you feel it, the less you resist. You don't even notice that you're not living for yourself anymore. You're living to avoid being accused, to avoid disappointing, to avoid guilt. That's not empathy. That's submission. So the next time someone lays their story at your feet, watch closely. Ask yourself, is this shared for connection or control? Are they inviting you into their pain, or are they using it to keep you trapped? Because when guilt is given a story, and that story is never allowed to be questioned, you are not being moral, you are being manipulated, and you won't know until it's too late. Imagine a burning building, the kind where flames curl up the walls like fingers, smoke billows thick as oil, and screams echo off crumbling concrete. And then he appears, the hero, rushing in while everyone else runs out, saving lives, rescuing children. Cameras catch his soot-streaked face as he emerges triumphantly from the chaos, clutching someone's sobbing grandmother in his arms. But what if he started the fire? What if the man we celebrate lit the match just so he could put it out? Welcome to one of the darkest truths about human ambition. Some people create chaos only so they can be seen fixing it. Not because they want to help, but because they want the power that comes with appearing heroic. It sounds insane, evil even, but it's more common than you think. Consider the workplace. The project mysteriously derails. Tensions rise. Deadlines loom. Then, out of nowhere, a colleague swoops in with the perfect solution. Everyone cheers. Crisis averted. But look closely, and you'll see the signs, subtle manipulations, planted doubts, delayed emails, quiet sabotage. They created the problem just to own the solution. It's a classic power move. The orchestrator of chaos gets to play savior. And in doing so, they earn loyalty, gratitude, and most importantly, because when you save someone from a problem, they trust you. They lean on you. They need you. Even if you were the reason they needed saving in the first place. This isn't just strategy, it's psychological warfare. It preys on a universal human instinct. We remember those who rescue us. We rarely question their motives. Think about politics. A leader stokes division, amplifies fear, manufactures threats, then offers protection. Only I can save you, they say conveniently, from the danger they themselves helped create. They break systems, sow unrest, and then step forward as the only one who can restore order. It's not leadership. It's arson disguised as rescue. But why does this work so well? Because when people are scared, they don't think clearly. When the ground is shifting beneath your feet, you don't stop to ask who's shaking it. You just grab onto the hand that's reaching out. The chaos hero strategy exploits confusion. It weaponizes distress, and it makes the architect of misery look like a saint. But it goes deeper. There's a seduction in playing hero. The applause, the admiration, the illusion of moral superiority. Saving people feeds the ego. Controlling the crisis feeds the appetite for power. And once someone tastes that power, chaos becomes their playground. They become addicted to it, so they create more fires, more emergencies, more situations where they can rise above the rubble and say, "Look what I saved you from." The cycle continues. Destruction and rescue, fear and relief, damage and healing, all controlled by one hand and the people. They're too disoriented to notice, too grateful to question, too desperate for safety, to see the strings being pulled behind the curtain. Even in personal relationships, this pattern appears. One partner creates drama, then comforts the other. A parent sabotages a child's independence, then plays the supportive mentor. Emotional volatility masquerades as love. Control is masked as care. And here's the most disturbing part. It's hard to see it happening, because it doesn't look like abuse. It looks like protection. It looks like love. It looks like leadership. It looks like a hero. But it's a mask, a carefully curated illusion, designed to obscure the fact that the fire was never accidental, that the chaos wasn't fate, it was planned. So how do you recognize it? Look for the patterns. Who benefits when things fall apart? Who rises in the aftermath, always one step ahead of the crisis? Who positions themselves as the answer before anyone knew there was a problem? And most importantly, who keeps finding themselves in the center of every storm? Some people crave control so deeply, they'll break the world just to rebuild it in their image. Not because they want to help, but because they want to be the one you thank for helping. They will manufacture emergencies, fan the flames, then drape themselves in glory for dousing them. And the rest of us, we become their audience, applauding their bravery, blind to their deception, grateful to be saved from the very danger they engineered. Now ask yourself, what happens when someone who thrives on chaos gains real power? And more importantly, what will they destroy next, just to be the one who saves it? Imagine speaking honestly, openly, about who you are, what you think, and why you do what you do. Now imagine the silence that follows. Not the kind filled with curiosity or patience, but the cold, assessing silence of someone waiting to respond, not to understand, but to correct, to contain, to calibrate. They don't want to understand you, they want to manage you. From childhood, you're taught to speak your truth, to express your feelings, to be authentic. But that lesson has an invisible asterisk. You're only encouraged to be real when it's convenient, palatable, and easily categorized. The moment your truth becomes too complex, too raw, or too inconvenient, it's met with confusion, resistance, even punishment. Think about it. Have you ever tried explaining a fear that doesn't make sense, a sadness that has no obvious source, or an ambition that feels irrational? The room doesn't lean in, it leans away. You're told to calm down, to think rationally, to be realistic. Not because they care about your well-being, but because your discomfort disrupts their order. Your complexity threatens their control. This isn't always malicious. In fact, it's often disguised as care. Friends give advice. Managers offer feedback. Parents suggest what's best for you. But peel back the layers and you'll see a pattern. These aren't responses to understand you better. They're strategies to make you fit, to make you manageable. Understanding requires effort, patience, the willingness to enter someone else's world without a map. But management just needs a label. Once you've been labeled difficult, sensitive, intense, rebellious, they don't have to listen anymore. They only have to respond according to protocol. You become a problem to solve, not a person to know. This is especially true in institutions. Schools don't want to understand a child's unique learning style. They want compliance. Workplaces don't want to explore your creative vision. They want deliverables. Even therapists, sometimes, don't want to sit in your chaos. They want progress, structure. And the more complex you are, the more resistance you'll meet. Not because you're wrong, but because you're inconvenient. You slow things down. You raise questions the system isn't equipped to answer. You ask for nuance in a world that runs on binary thinking. Then here's the sinister part. The more you try to explain yourself in a world that doesn't want to understand you, the more you feel like you're the problem. You begin to doubt your own clarity. You wonder if you're too much, too emotional, too complicated. But the truth is, you're not too anything. You're just not easily managed. And that's exactly what threatens them. Because control is easier when people are predictable, when they follow scripts, when their needs are basic and their reactions are standard. That's why institutions, governments, even relationships, consciously or not, train you to simplify yourself. They prefer you numb, compliant, manageable. Even your own mind gets recruited into the mission. You start editing yourself preemptively, predicting how others will respond, and adjusting before they even say a word. You dilute your truth, not because you want to, but because you've learned the cost of full expression is isolation, rejection, control disguised as concern. But here's the paradox. The less you're understood, the more you're managed. And the more you're managed, the less you're allowed to be understood. The cycle feeds itself, until you don't even remember what it felt like to be seen. So what do? You stop performing understanding for people who won't return it. You stop shrinking your complexity into bite-sized pieces just to avoid confrontation. And most of all, you recognize the difference between connection and containment. Because one frees you and the other devours you. Because the moment you begin demanding real understanding, the moment you insist on being known instead of handled, you stop being manageable. And for some people, that's the scariest thing you could ever be. Now ask yourself this. What if that fear is exactly what makes you powerful? You're taught to admire the moral person, the one who always knows what's right, who stands tall, speaks with conviction, and claims to have the answers. But here's a disturbing question. What if their morality isn't about truth or justice at all? What if it's about obedience? Think about how morality is usually presented to you. Not as a complex, evolving dialogue, but as a list of do's and don'ts. Don't lie, don't steal, don't question. Obey, and those who follow the list are deemed good. Those who don't, labeled dangerous, immoral, wicked. But who wrote that list? And more importantly, why? Because morality in the wrong hands becomes a leash. Not a guide to right and wrong, but a mechanism of control. A person preaching morality might not be trying to elevate your conscience. They might just want you to obey. It starts early. Think about school. You weren't just taught math or grammar, you were taught to sit still, raise your hand, respect authority, never talk back. The moral lesson wasn't curiosity, it was submission. The teacher wasn't just grading your answers, they were grading your compliance. And the highest reward wasn't insight, it was obedience masked as character. And it doesn't stop in childhood. Workplaces do it, religions do it, governments do it. They wrap obedience in the language of virtue. You're told it's noble to follow the rules, to respect the hierarchy, to sacrifice for the greater good. But when morality demands your silence, your conformity, your unquestioning loyalty, is it still morality, or is it just power in costume? This is how the game works. A person claims moral high ground. They speak of justice, community, duty. But what they're really doing is drawing a line, not between good and evil, but between those who follow them and those who don't. Morality becomes tribal. You're either inside the circle, safe and praised, or outside it, shamed, demonized, excluded. Not for doing harm, but for thinking differently. Consider history's darkest moments: genocides, purges, inquisitions. They weren't driven by people who thought they were evil. They were driven by people who thought they were moral, people who believed obedience to a higher code justified cruelty, that following orders wasn't just acceptable, it was righteous. And those who resisted, branded immoral, rebels, heretics, criminals, dangerous not because of what they did, but because they refused to kneel. See how it works? The moral preacher becomes the authority. The authority demands obedience, and obedience becomes the only definition of good. But here's the terrifying part: it works. People crave certainty. In a chaotic world, morality offers a script, a guide, a way to feel clean in a dirty world. And so they follow, even when the rules are cruel, even when the leaders are corrupt, even when their own conscience quietly screams, because it's easier to obey than to question, easier to be told you're good than to wrestle with what that actually means. And so morality becomes a tool, not to elevate humanity, but to domesticate it, not to build independent thinkers, but to create loyal subjects. It tells you what to think, how to act, who to trust, and who to hate. And if you question the narrative, you're not just disagreeing, you're betraying the moral order. This is why the person who shouts loudest about morality often fears disobedience more than injustice. Why their sermons focus less on compassion and more on punishment. Why they always seem more concerned with keeping you in line than setting you free. Because freedom is dangerous. It questions rules. It disobeys authority. It asks who benefits from this morality, who profits from my obedience. And the answer is always the same: those in power. So the next time someone tells you what's right and wrong, ask yourself, are they helping you grow, or are they asking you to kneel? Are they inviting you to think, or conditioning you to submit? Because morality should be a mirror, not a muzzle. It should reflect your deepest values, not silence them. And when someone preaches morality but punishes disobedience, they don't want you to be good. They want you to be controllable. And that's not morality. That's manipulation. Have you ever noticed how people will go to astonishing lengths to protect their image, even if it means letting someone else suffer? Not because they're evil, but because they're afraid. Afraid of being seen the wrong way. Afraid of being labeled, judged, or cast out. Reputation isn't just social currency. For many, it's identity. It's the mask they've worn so long they believe it's their face. Now imagine this. Someone close to you makes a mistake, an ugly public one, the kind that could tarnish everyone associated with them. You know the truth. You know they need support, but the spotlight turns, and suddenly your image is at risk. You could defend them, but instead you step back. You stay silent. You let them burn alone. Why? Because in that split second, their suffering mattered less than your survival. This isn't theoretical. It plays out in families, in friend groups, in corporations. A manager blames a junior employee for a failure they both contributed to, because owning it might hurt their career. A celebrity allows a team member to take the fall for a PR disaster, because apologizing publicly might damage their brand. We like to think we're better than this, that we'd take the hit for someone we care about. But when the moment comes, when the choice is real, image almost always wins. Because image is safety. Image is control. Image is survival. Think about whistleblowers, people who expose corruption or abuse within powerful institutions. What happens to them? They're not celebrated. They're punished, isolated, discredited. Why? Because their truth threatens the image of something bigger, something the system depends on appearing flawless. The institution doesn't care about the victims. It cares about appearances. Protecting image is often framed as professionalism, as loyalty, as maturity. But let's call it what it is: self-preservation. A quiet betrayal disguised as good judgment. But the most disturbing part, this isn't limited to the powerful. Ordinary people do it every day. A teacher sees a colleague mistreat a student, but saying something could spark drama or scrutiny, so they don't. A friend watches another spiral into addiction, but confronting it might damage the friendship, so they look away. In these moments, the calculation is cold and subconscious. Will helping them make me look bad? And when the answer is yes, the decision follows, then I won't help. This instinct is reinforced by the world we live in. A world where your worth is your brand, where social media trains you to curate your life like a product, every caption crafted for perception. You're not just living, you're performing. And in performance, mistakes are unacceptable. Associations are liabilities. Image is everything. So we learn to choose silence over truth, distance over solidarity, self-protection over compassion. But what does that cost us? It costs us integrity, connection, humanity. The very things we claim to value most. We start to see others as threats to our reflection. We stop standing up. We stop standing together. And the system loves that, because divided people are easily managed. And the deeper cost, we betray ourselves. Every time we prioritize image over truth, we fracture our own identity. We become hollow versions of ourselves, polished on the outside, decaying on the inside. The truth is, image isn't strength, it's armor, and armor, by design, isolates. It keeps you safe, yes, but also alone. So the question is this: who are you when no one's watching? When no one will know what you did? When doing the right thing means risking everything you've built, would you still choose it? Most won't. Most never do. Because in a world that punishes honesty and rewards appearances, it feels safer to let others suffer than to be seen as weak, wrong, or responsible. And that's not just disturbing, that's devastating. Because if everyone protects their image, who protects the truth? Who protects the vulnerable? Who protects you when you're the one left to burn? The answer is simple: no one. What makes truth powerful isn't just what it says, but when it's said. Picture this. You're in the middle of a heated argument. You've been vulnerable, exposed, and just as you crack open, someone drops a truth on you, not a lie, not an exaggeration. The train leaving aside, the two is just a raw, accurate observation about your deepest flaw, the kind of truth that leaves no room to breathe. Now ask yourself, why did they wait until now? That's what weaponized truth looks like. Because truth, despite its reputation, isn't inherently moral. It doesn't arrive on white horses with perfect timing and good intentions. Truth, when placed carefully, deliberately, can wound deeper than any lie. and in the hands of someone hungry for control, it becomes something else entirely: precision manipulation. This is the paradox we rarely confront. We're taught to revere truth, to value it above all else, but not all truth liberates. Some truths are deployed like knives, not to enlighten, but to disable, not to clarify, but to punish. Timing is everything. You can be told the exact same truth at two different moments and experience it as wisdom in one and betrayal in another. A comment about your character, your mistakes, your past, it can feel constructive when you're safe, when you're ready. But in moments of collapse, when your defenses are already down, that same truth can be used to devastate, to control the story you tell yourself about who you are. And that's what power often looks like. Not lies, but strategically timed revelations. A truth withheld until it can't be resisted, until it lands with maximum emotional force. Think of political scandals. Notice how the most damning facts are rarely revealed in pursuit of justice. They're released when they serve someone else's agenda. A rival campaign, a media blitz. The timing is the message. The truth may be valid, but its release is calculated. Truth becomes a scalpel, not a mirror. Even in personal relationships, this tactic appears constantly. Someone waits until they can use your own past against you. They keep receipts, collect mistakes, catalogue flaws, not to understand you, but to possess leverage, to ensure that when the moment comes they can say, "I'm not lying, I'm just being honest." As if truth delivered at the worst possible time is any less brutal than a lie. Manipulators love truth because it's harder to challenge. If someone lies to you, your defenses rise. Your brain instinctively resists. But when someone speaks the truth, even cruelly, even intentionally timed, it disarms you. It makes you question yourself instead of them. You become ashamed, not angry. That's the manipulation. It's not in the content. It's in the calculus. Timing turns truth into a psychological trap. It isolates you, makes you doubt your own reaction. If what they said is technically true, why does it feel so cruel? Why do you feel smaller? We're rarely taught to ask that question, so we internalize it. We assume the pain is our fault, and that assumption that your reaction is the problem is exactly how control is maintained. Because once someone can make you doubt your own hurt, they own the narrative. This is why the most dangerous people don't always lie. They just wait. They observe. They store the truth like ammunition, waiting for the moment it'll sting the most. And when they fire, it sounds righteous. It sounds fair, but it was never about fairness. It was always about dominance. Even justice can be distorted this way. If you expose someone's wrongdoings, but only once they threaten your comfort or position, are you really after truth or just retaliation? Timing reveals intention, and intention reveals whether truth is being used to illuminate or to manipulate. This is why so many people are afraid of truth, not because it's wrong, but because it can be used like a weapon with no fingerprints. And unlike lies, truth doesn't come with the instinct to push back. It seeps in quietly, it lingers, and when timed right, it sticks. So what does this mean for you? It means truth is not immune from abuse. It means you must learn to read not just what is said, but why it's being said now. Timing reveals motive, and motive reveals whether truth is being used to heal or to harm. Never confuse accuracy with integrity, because even the truth, especially the truth, can become a tool of manipulation when deployed with surgical cruelty. And those who know this best often wield it with a smile, insisting they're just being honest, while their timing tells you everything you need to know. Now ask yourself, Who in your life waits until you're weakest to finally speak the truth? And more importantly, what are they trying to make you believe about yourself that serves them? That's the real truth you need to uncover. Have you ever noticed how fast morality dissolves when the person causing harm has power? You see it everywhere, in boardrooms, in politics, in households. Someone with status, influence, or authority does something cruel, something you'd never tolerate from anyone else, and suddenly everyone falls silent. No one speaks up. No one confronts, not because they don't see the cruelty, but because they do, and they see who's behind it. It's not that people don't recognize abuse when they see it. It's that they weigh the cost of calling it out and decide it's too high, because when the cruel person has power, confronting them feels dangerous, risky, maybe even suicidal. Think about it. You're at work, and your boss humiliates a colleague in front of everyone. You feel the outrage bubbling in your chest, but you say nothing. You don't want to be next. You don't want to be labeled difficult, so you stay quiet, hoping someone else will speak. They don't. Silence spreads like rot. It's the same in politics. A powerful leader promotes a cruel policy, one that punishes the vulnerable, rewards the corrupt, and dehumanizes entire groups of people. It's unjust. You know it's wrong, but confronting it openly, that could cost your job, your safety, your reputation, so you rationalize. Maybe it's more complicated. Maybe you don't have the full story. Maybe it's not your place. This is how cruelty survives. Not just through force, but through our fear of force. Power doesn't need to hide its cruelty. It just needs to make sure confronting it feels dangerous. Once people believe speaking up will cost them more than staying silent, the game is over. Not because everyone agrees, but because they're too afraid to disagree. You convince yourself it's prudence, maturity, strategic silence. But deep down, you know it's surrender. And it doesn't stop there. Once we stop confronting cruelty, we start justifying it. We turn power into an excuse. He's under a lot of stress. She doesn't mean it like that. It's not personal, it's just business. We reframe abuse as strength, insensitivity as efficiency, cruelty as leadership. Because if the person in charge is cruel and we need them to survive, then cruelty must not be that bad. Or worse, maybe it's necessary. And here's where it gets even darker. The more powerful someone becomes, the less likely they are to be confronted. Not because their actions are less cruel, but because their cruelty becomes normalized, accepted, institutionalized. It becomes the culture. Think of hazing rituals, brutal workplace environments, toxic relationships that continue for years. Not because people enjoy the pain, but because they've learned that confronting it leads to punishment, while submission at least offers safety. So cruelty becomes systemic. It embeds itself into policies, hierarchies, norms, and we all adapt. We start to believe that suffering is the cost of ambition, that injustice is just the price of doing business, that abuse is a sign of strength. Until one day we find ourselves imitating the very cruelty we once feared, because now it's the only language power seems to understand. And that's the final twist. When cruelty and power become indistinguishable, those who rise often feel forced to abandon their conscience. Not because they want to, but because decency starts to feel like a liability. And so the cycle continues. We don't just avoid confronting cruelty, we learn to admire it, to emulate it, to reward it. And in doing so, we become exactly what we were once afraid of. Now ask yourself, how many cruel people in your life have escaped accountability? Not because they were innocent, but because they were powerful. And how many times did you let them? Maybe not because you agreed, but because you were afraid. Power doesn't just protect cruelty, it thrives on your silence. And the longer you stay quiet, the more you start to believe the lie that cruelty is invincible, until one day it is. Have you ever noticed that some people don't want peace, even when it's offered to them on a silver platter? They don't want compromise. They don't want resolution. They want one thing: dominance. It's tempting to believe that deep down, everyone wants harmony. That if we just talk long enough, understand each other deeply enough, we can find common ground. But that's a comforting illusion. Because, for some, peace is not the goal, it's an obstacle. Winning is the only end that matters. Winning means someone else loses. And for those obsessed with power, that's the point. Picture a negotiation. Two sides, locked in disagreement. One wants a solution, a path forward. The other, they're not looking to meet in the middle. They're watching, calculating, waiting. For the moment you blink, because the longer you hope for peace, the more vulnerable you become. To them, peace is weakness, compromise is surrender, and every offer you make is just another chance to manipulate you. This isn't miscommunication. This isn't a failure to empathize. It's strategy. Think about it. Peace requires empathy. It requires humility, restraint, and a willingness to admit fault. But power-hungry individuals don't value those traits. They see them as liabilities. They exploit them. They weaponize your kindness, your reasonableness, your desire for stability, and use them to pull you closer, just before the trap snaps shut. They're not playing the same game as you. You're trying to build a bridge. They're counting the steps until they can burn it behind you. This mindset shows up everywhere. From politics to relationships to war. The bully who keeps pushing, even after you back down. The partner who escalates every argument, not to resolve it, but to win. The leader who doesn't just want to defeat their enemies, but to humiliate them. For them, peace is never the goal. Victory is. Even when a truce is possible, even when justice is within reach, some will sabotage it. Not because it's unfair, but because it isn't total. They want more. They want everything. And they will burn the entire landscape to ash, if it means standing alone on the ruins. That's the paradox. Peace is only possible when both sides want it. But when one side wants power more than peace, the very act of seeking peace becomes a liability. It's a trap disguised as virtue. And if you've ever found yourself trying to reason with someone who never gives an inch, never listens, never compromises, you already know this truth. They're not looking for a resolution. They're looking for submission. This doesn't mean you should abandon peace as an ideal, but it does mean you need to know when peace is being used against you, when it's a mask, when it's bait, and when the only way forward is not to talk, but to walk away. Because sometimes trying to make peace with someone who only wants to win means forfeiting your own dignity, your own sanity, your own power. And they count on that. They count on you being too kind to fight back, too hopeful to walk away, too decent to recognize the game for what it is. But once you do, everything changes. Because not everyone wants peace. Some just want to win. And if you forget that, you've already lost. You know that moment when someone looks at you just a little too long, waiting for your approval? That flicker in their eyes, a quiet plea, "Do you respect me?" It seems innocent, harmless even, but that need, that deep, desperate need to feel respected, it's a force that can twist minds, reshape morals, and justify the unthinkable. We are creatures of status. From the moment we become self-aware, we begin scanning the world for cues, how we're treated, how we're seen, where we rank. Respect isn't a luxury, it's oxygen. When we sense disrespect, it feels like suffocation, like an existential threat. And when people feel disrespected long enough, they start doing dangerous things to reclaim their breath. This is where it begins. At first, it looks subtle, a sharp word to assert dominance, a power play to regain control. A lie told just to be heard, it escalates quietly, invisibly, until it becomes vengeance, masked as justice, cruelty disguised as self-defense. You've seen it. The bullied kid who becomes the tormentor. The humiliated employee who burns the company to the ground. The disrespected partner who lashes out, not to hurt, but to restore some crumbling piece of their self-worth. It's not just about revenge, it's about repair. The mind will rewrite any story, bend any rule, excuse any action, if it means restoring the fragile illusion of being respected. Because the opposite of respect isn't just disregard, it's erasure. When people feel disrespected, they don't just feel low, they feel invisible, worthless, unseen. And that psychological vacuum demands to be filled, often with force. History is littered with this pattern. Revolutionaries, warlords, CEOs, cult leaders, how many of them rose not out of principle, but from a wounded sense of pride. Scratch the surface of any tyrant, and you'll find a moment, an insult, a rejection, a humiliation that rewired their brain and reshaped their path. And yet, we rarely see it coming. Because when someone says they need respect, we assume they mean admiration, praise. But what they often mean is submission, agreement, deference. They don't want to be treated equally. They want to be unchallenged. And that's where things turn. The need for respect becomes a mask for control, a shield against accountability, a weapon to justify manipulation. Look at political strongmen. Look at violent ideologies. Look at toxic relationships. At the center of each is a narrative of disrespect. They ignored us. They mocked me. They took what was mine. That story, repeated enough times, becomes permission. Permission to punish, to dominate, to silence. It doesn't matter how cruel the act. If it's framed as reclaiming dignity, people will do it, and they'll feel righteous as they do. Think about the language we use. Don't let them disrespect you. Make them respect you. These are not suggestions for grace. They're mandates for retaliation. We are taught that respect is not earned through character, but seized through dominance. That you don't ask for respect, you demand it. And when that respect still doesn't come, the mind spirals. Because if others don't see your worth, maybe you don't have any. That thought is unbearable. So the ego finds a lifeline, delusion. It rewrites the world. It turns criticism into betrayal, turns boundaries into insults, turns truth into attack. The terrifying part, this isn't rare, it's the baseline. From fragile bosses to radicalized loners, this pattern plays out again and again. People don't need to be evil to do harm, they just need to feel disrespected. And once that wire is tripped, anything becomes justifiable, anything. Even violence, even war, even genocide. Because when a group believes it has been disrespected, systematically, repeatedly, unforgivably, violence is no longer seen as cruel, it's seen as honorable, necessary. The need for respect doesn't just excuse the unthinkable, it makes it feel noble. That's the horror. You can strip someone's resources, challenge their beliefs, even threaten their survival, and they might still hold back. But strip their respect, make them feel small, unseen, ridiculed. That's when the mask slips. That's when you see what they're capable of. But here's the deeper danger. This isn't just about other people, it's about you. Because one day you'll feel it too. That raw ache of being overlooked, dismissed, disrespected, and when it comes, it won't feel like a feeling. It'll feel like truth, like injustice. And in that moment, you'll want to do something, say something, prove something. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself justifying something you once thought unforgivable. You'll call it strength. You'll call it necessary. You'll call it right. Because the need to feel respected doesn't whisper. It screams. It drowns out your better nature. And if you don't know its voice, you won't even realize who's speaking. You'll think it's you.